Well, welcome everybody to our regularly scheduled city council meeting. It's great to see you all here. We are going to get this meeting started, and we do that with an invocation, which we observe by a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll stand and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, everybody. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Bajent.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Haney Keith.
Here.
Nash.
Here.
Willits.
Here.
Whittings.
Here.
All present.
And next up, we have a request for approval of the minutes from April 18th, both the work session and evening meeting.
Madam Mayor, I request approval of the City Council minutes for the work session and regular evening meeting of April 18th, 2023.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Haney Keith.
Yes.
Nash. Willits.
Yes.
Whittings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And now we have the appointment of Councilmember Latanya Haney Keith to the Harris Ranch CID Board for a term ending January 2024.
Sorry, I kind of jumped the gun. Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent for the appointment of Latanya Haney Keith to the Harris Ranch Community Infrastructure District Board.
Without objection. Well, thank you, council member. Appreciate it. All right, and now we're going to move into the special business that many of us are here for tonight, and that is the confirmation and swearing in of Ron Weiniger as police chief. Before I put forth Ron Weiniger's nomination as police chief, I just wanted to say a couple things, and then I imagine other people have things to say once we take this up. But twice in the last several years, Ron has heeded my call to help support the city. And back in 2020 and again in the fall of 2022. And he said yes. And he said yes because of his deep commitment to public service that I believe is a deeply held value, and his deep commitment to this community and the people of this community and the people that make up Boise Police Department. And he leads with compassion and kindness. And I already referenced for who, but not only for the people of Boise that feel it, sense it in their interactions with them and in the feedback that I receive from the community, but also the men and women of Boise Police Department, both our sworn officers and our staff. And especially in these times, his steady leadership is deeply appreciated. And I want to say that when I have thought about what our city needs for a permanent police chief, it's somebody that is a demonstrated leader, that shares Boise values, lives them, believes them as deeply as each of us does, and is willing to do all that one must for the community and for the department. And also understands that our city's growing and changing, and that we all value the sense of security and safety that is real in this city, and that we, in order for us to stay a safe and welcoming city, that we need leadership that knows what we have, knows what we must do to keep it, and he fits that bill. And after 28 years of service and 6 months, and I'd say kind of an on-the-job interview for 6 months, I think I called you about 6 months after you started with us again. I knew we had the right candidate in Ron. And so I just want to say that thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you to Zelfie, your family, 2 of your kids who are here and the other 2 that aren't, for sharing you with us. And that in Boise, our crime rates are the lowest that we've seen them in over 2 decades. Our promotions within the department are up. Our recruitments are up. And this is happening under Ron's watch and with Ron's leadership and the team that he's helped assemble to lead this department. And this was really important to me, that as we place a permanent police chief, that the results that we've seen in the last 6 months the work that we've done together to keep this city safe and welcoming today and into the future is exemplified in the Leadership Daily by Ron. And it was for that reason that I called Ron to ask him to serve, and am now asking that you accept his nomination.
Do we need to make a motion first?
Yes.
Madam Mayor, I move that we confirm Ron Weiniger as the Chief of Police.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Thank you. If there's any discussion.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I brought props tonight because
I thought you wrote down here.
no, I did not write down here. But several years ago, we had a new police chief and Ron was serving as our deputy chief of police. We had an event out at Idaho Botanical Garden with Inclusive Idaho, and it was a kind of a small forum on police and how we police our city in a way that's respectful to people. And Ron was a great participant in that. I rode my bike to the Botanical Garden and I did so forgetting my helmet. And so I was commenting about this as we were leaving the Botanical Garden, and Ron literally gave me the helmet off of his head so that I could ride home more safely than I had ridden down there. And I think that that really speaks to the type of leader that Ron is. Really excited to have you here permanently in this very important position, in this very important moment in time for our city as we navigate how we police in the 21st century. So thank you for heeding the call.
Madam Mayor, I think I can keep this pretty short and sweet. You know, I don't think that there's another person in this room or another person that works for the city who cares about the city as much as you do, or who's given as much to the city in so many different ways. So I just want to say thank you for your service. I want to say congratulations for when you get the results of this vote. And I hope this means that I get to see you riding with your swing bike with a bunch of kids here in the future. So thank you.
Madam Mayor. Well, first of all, thank you. I think that Chief, you're the right person at the right time. And thank you for heeding this appointment and serving, and it impacts your family. And we thank you for that. I think you're the right person to hit the reset button. You know, you and I have had quite a few conversations, and every time I've left, I've thought this is a man of compassion. And this is a man who has paid a heavy price for his service. And, you know, those who are new to our community may not know that about you, but I know that we know, and you're continuing to serve. And that means a lot. It means a lot to the people that not only run the city, but the people that you'll be serving. So thank you for showing how to stand up in adversity, how to keep going, how to show grit. And I know that that story of your life and all that you've done is going to inspire others to keep going too. So thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'm very much looking forward to voting to confirm you, sir. My interactions with soon-to-be Chief Weiniger have been informative. I've learned so much about policing in general, policing in Boise, that frankly, the culture of our community and many of the histories of things that have developed over time. And that's the right person to be in that important leadership role, that long accumulated cultural knowledge, the skills and the ability to apply it to a community that I know this man loves very, very much. He has to. He keeps coming back and taking on this selfless role. I'm impressed with you. You're inspirational to me in many ways, and I'm deeply thankful that you're willing to do this for us.
All right. Well, with that, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Nash, Willetts,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Well, thank you, Chief. So now I will actually, if you and your family all want to come up, I'll come on down, and we have to do the oath. And then after that, I'd ask you to say a few words. I'm good. Oh, no, that's all right. I'll come back. It's gonna have to be
I, Ron Weiger,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
State of Idaho
and of the state of Idaho
and the laws and ordinances of
and the laws and ordinances of Boise,
that I will, to the best of my ability,
and that I will, to the best of my ability,
faithfully
perform the duties of the office of Chief of Police
during my continuous
during my continuance there.
Before I lose you all, Sophie, I wanted to give you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, it is a privilege and an honor to be here this evening, and I graciously accept the appointment at this time. Thankful for the opportunity to once again serve the members of this community and the members of our department. I do, in fact, care deeply about the organization, the Boise Police Department, as well as the city of Boise and our greater community in this Treasure Valley. It is with trying to find the right word is difficult. It is with gratitude that I look back on the 28 years that I have spent here with the city of Boise. It has been not all rainbows and butterflies, as I have said many times before, but it has been rewarding, it has been satisfying, and it has been an honor to serve. And I am grateful for the opportunity to continue to serve now in this role as the chief of police. And I will do my best to bring public safety and community service and community policing with me and through the department and through the community as we partner together to make sure that this is a safe and livable city for everyone. So thank you.
Well, thank you and congratulations. Don't want your family to feel like you have to stay here if you have celebrations, or you should have celebrations. So feel free to leave, but thank you all so much for being here to celebrate this night. Okay, we will move into the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second,
We have a motion and a second.
Madam
discussion?
Mayor. Oh yeah, I thought you were going to go straight to calling the roll.
Oh, I learned last time.
Yeah. There is an item number 24 that I just want to bring attention to, and it's an MOU between the City of Boise Parks and Rec and the Land Trust of Treasure Valley with the Hillside to Hollow Reserve restoration. And if you're in that area or if you've worked with this nonprofit, you know that their end of the deal isn't necessarily the best one. They basically go in and clean up after a lot of the public when, you know, dog poop is left behind, bags are left behind, they empty out the trash. They basically, after giving so much to make this piece of property possible and accessible to our community members, spend so much time taking care of it. And the MOU really is the world's best deal for the city of the city of Boise to partner with the Land Trust of Treasure Valley to, plant sagebrush, to do all sorts of things to make this area better. And it's a reminder to me of how lucky we are to have these partnerships with the nonprofit sector.
Thanks for flagging that.
Madam Mayor, I also wanted to flag Resolution 230-23. And this is our Air Service Incentive Program. I don't see Rebecca here, but I thought I saw her a little bit earlier. This is our affirmation of where we would like to incentivize air service in the city so that people can access commerce, access fun and vacations and visiting family. And it's a really important program that we have. So it's exciting to see us target some new East Coast cities for that.
All right, clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Nash, Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Okay, we're now going to move into public hearings. We've got 4 this evening. The first is the appeal of PUD 22-3 by Intermountain Fair Housing Council and Elam and Burke on behalf of Erstad Architects. With this one, Jesse Lyle and Tim Keen are here to present on the city perspective. We're going to have, because both parties have appealed part of this, but one is the applicant. The appellant that we're using in terms of ordering is the Idaho Fair Housing Council. I saw, Lori, are you representing them tonight? Monica. Okay, great. Thanks. And then we'll go to the applicant. I've got Erstad Architects on here, but I think it's you all, right? Okay. All right. And then from there, we have if the Central Bench Neighborhood Association is represented. If you're not here, I don't see Jordan in person, but if you're online, just raise your hand and we'll come to you next. And then after that, I have a list of all the parties of record. And so then we'll go into folks that are here in person, as well as folks that are online to testify. And so if you come up, if you know your party of record, that makes it really easy. But I'll be trying to cross-reference at the same time. It looks like it's organized by, it's not organized alphabetically. So I might need a moment to find your name in there, but otherwise just come on up. And after that, I don't have then it's right. So then it's the applicant gets the last word. The applicant and then the appellant again. So we'll do it that way again at the end. Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and start. I don't think your mic's on.
Mayor, members of council, Tim Keen, Director of Planning and Development Services. I'll present this item tonight. I did want to mention one thing, Mayor, which is on the agenda. We have an item here that's deferred. I don't know if people are here for that. And just to be cognizant of that.
Which one is that?
This is the 4th item, the appeal, Amy George there.
Oh, why don't we? Okay, I see they're requesting deferral, so we have to make that official. But is anybody here or is anybody online here for the CVA 22-27 on Fifeshire Avenue? Okay.
Does that take action or is that of council?
Yes, because we'll defer it to the date certain,
Okay.
but we'll pick that up at the end since we already opened up this one.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Well,
Thanks for flagging that.
I will go ahead and present on this item tonight. Jesse Lyle, of course, has been handling this case from the beginning and doing a great job with it. I will go through a few slides here. If we can. Okay, I see him over there. Just to help with my presentation tonight, a little bit of background material for the mayor and everyone joining us tonight. This is the case before you, as the mayor said. This is we've got 2 appeals on this case. We received an application for a planned residential development for 77 multifamily units. This property is located. This property is just over. It's 5.26 acres at 1093 Hilton Street in an R2 residential zone, with a variety of housing around it and commercial uses in the vicinity. That's the location of the property there on these maps. On the left, you see the aerial. On the right, you've got the zoning map. This item would look familiar to some of the council members here because the Planning and Zoning Commission originally approved this project or approved the planned residential development. It was heard before council in October of 2022 of last year. When that came before council, you had quite a bit of discussion about it and remanded it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission so that they could. One of the big issues was the noticing of the residents at this location. So there was much discussion of that at council and a desire to make sure that people that were living there had sufficient notice. Then also to hold another neighborhood meeting, and then importantly to provide a transition plan for the residents that live on this site now. This is a location of an assisted living center. The applicant is seeking to change the use from the assisted living center to those 77 multifamily units. So this is council's action from October of last year. On February 13th of this year, 2023, the Planning and Zoning Commission held a new public hearing for this item. Many concerns were raised about what will happen to the residents of the facility. This was the main issue that was expressed at this hearing, as well as with other hearings. The difficulty of finding new housing and housing that accepts Medicaid without private pay, concerns about the proposed transition plan, and concerns about the kind of lack of transparency with the current residents of this location or the assisted living. The applicant spoke to the vacancy rates at this location and other facilities, similar facilities, as a reason for the conversion, as well as issues around the financial burden of operating the facility. During the deliberations, the commission found the application generally met the land use requirements for a PUD, a plan unit development, as shown on the screen. So these are the plan unit development criteria that the Planning Commission has to consider when looking at an application like this or any application for a plan unit development. These are the criteria that they use in their deliberations around whether the plan unit development should be approved or not. And this has to do with all of these issues related to land use and design and the impact on the public infrastructure and these kinds of things. And so you had this discussion as the technical discussion that the Planning and Zoning Commission was having related to whether or not this application met the plan unit development criteria. However, much of the discussion related to, of course, the concerns about the residents that live on this property and how this redevelopment would impact them, and the fact that they would be displaced from this property. So that a lot of discussion related to that, and about the kind of vague and somewhat moving target aspect of the transition plan, its lack of protection for residents. And so as a result of that, the commission, in approving this plan unit development, did add conditions, which you see here on the screen, to the approval of the project. So the discussion on the one hand was about the criteria for a plan unit development, which relates to land use and is that an appropriate land use in this area and those kinds of things, which they took into account and made a decision that yes, it met that criteria. But the concern around what's the plan for the people that live here and how are they going to be taken care of was foremost on the Planning and Zoning Commission's mind. And so they added these conditions, the first of which is that the existing residents will get a year to find suitable and comparable housing in another location. Number two, upon identification of that new housing for the tenants, the applicant would pay for relocation expenses. And the Planning and Zoning Commission used the Uniform Relocation Act as a guide here in terms of what those costs would be, because the Uniform Relocation Act has a schedule for what those costs should be for any one of a different, if you're a studio apartment or a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, three-bedroom, what those costs should be that in this case, the applicant would be paying for the relocation of people that are currently on this property. And then the third condition was that if the new housing that is found for the existing residents is more expensive than what they're currently paying, then the applicant would have to provide the difference in cost of the new housing from the current rent for a period of 3 years, or alternatively, the applicant could make a lump sum payment to each of the residents, again, following the schedule that is maintained by HUD through the Uniform Relocation Act. So these conditions were added to the approval of this plan unit development by the commission on February 13th of 2023. So we have 2 appeals, as the mayor mentioned tonight. One is from Intermountain Fair Housing, the Intermountain Fair Housing Council, and the other is from the applicant. The Intermountain Fair Housing Council appealed the commission's decision to approve the plan unit development. And the grounds for their appeal are shown here on the slide. The applicant, on the other hand, is only appealing the conditions added by the commission at the February meeting. There's no evidence to demonstrate the commission erred in their decision. The city is responsible for administering the zoning code and approving conditional use permits based on that criteria that I showed for plan unit development earlier in the slideshow, and not other regulations that may apply to applicant or landlord-tenant relationships that come from other levels of government. The Planning and Zoning Commission, of course, is responsible for administering the zoning code and the rules and criteria found within it. The commission outlined the evidence in support of their findings and the reason for the decision on February 13th meeting. And finally, the commission considered all testimony and asked questions for clarification during the hearing within that public realm. And in response to the testimony that they received, the commission asked questions for answers and also for clarification. They also deliberated extensively over their findings and found there was sufficient evidence to approve the plan unit development request with those added conditions of approval relating to how those that are living on the property right now would be assisted as a result of this relocation. So that relates to that first appeal. The applicant, the appeal grounds submitted by the applicant are here on the screen now. However, there's no evidence to demonstrate the Planning and Zoning Commission erred in its decision to add conditions of approval to this plan unit development approval. The commission has the authority to impose conditions that proportionally mitigate impacts of any development requiring a conditional use permit. The commission discussed the citywide impacts of allowing this conversion and the comprehensive plan goals, both in support and opposition to the conversion. They also heard testimony from the public as well as from the applicant about the challenges of finding housing, for those that would be displaced. The conditions imposed by the commission address these concerns by addressing the comprehensive plan goals that protect vulnerable populations. The commission also utilized a widely accepted program, the Uniform Relocation Act, as a guideline to provide a reasonable condition for both the tenant and the applicant. Additionally, the commission heard testimony about the varying timelines for pay associated with the tenants here, leading to the adoption of the 3-year subsidy time period. The commission recognized that while the application is unique, it's not unique for the Planning and Zoning Commission to impose conditions on development. Even during the deliberation, the commission referenced that it's a regular occurrence that add conditions to plan unit development approvals or conditional use permits. Even at that meeting, citing an earlier applicant at that meeting where the commission conditioned approval on the construction of a sidewalk. This is seen as a public good and direct and proportional results, even if the financial burden is to the applicant. The commission discussed the impacts that this change in use would have on the city as a whole, and the impacts would have, impacts beyond just the site, considering the vulnerability of this population, and so forth. And really felt like, when you take into account the criteria around a plan unit development, which is a set of criteria that you apply to any request for a conditional use permit or a plan unit development, that within the context of the land use requirements, that the application met those requirements. But the concern was the lack of sufficient evidence that the people that are living there now would be helped in a way that they needed help in order to move, find new housing, pay for that relocation, and so forth. So in conclusion, the planning team, the planning department recommends that the council deny both appeals and uphold the commission's decision to approve the planning unit development with the added conditions as the request meets the required findings and complies with the requirements of the development code. There is no evidence to suggest the commission erred in its decision. And so we suggest that the two appeals that are before you tonight be denied. Happy to answer any questions about my presentation or the history on this. And yes, thank you.
First off, I'd ask that you reference the letter that was received
Sorry,
today.
Mayor, I put that note at the beginning, and we did receive a letter this afternoon from Intermountain Fair Housing, who, as I mentioned, is one of our appellants tonight, appealing the approval of the Planning Commission action to approve the plan unit development. And we did receive a request from them this afternoon for mediation. So I wanted to let council know of that.
Thank you. Are there questions for Tim?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thanks, Tim. So in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, they referred to some specific areas in the comprehensive plan for that. I think it's the 5th criteria of whether it meets. And I'm wondering, and this is where they really found like these don't align with some of the things that are mentioned or directly referred to in the comprehensive plan. I can look those up. I actually have got them in the transcripts on page 183 of the 509 page packet, or page 94 on there. I'm wondering even if you don't know the specific ones, if you can speak to some of the areas of the comprehensive plan that the Planning and Zoning Commission were concerned about.
Well, the areas where the Planning and Zoning Commission, the area that they were concerned about has entirely to do with the vulnerability of the existing residents, the evidence, because the comprehensive plan speaks to this, concerns around displacement of vulnerable populations in the city and what the impact of housing redevelopment would have upon them. So it speaks to the community, the city, applicants, city council, the Planning and Zoning Commission, finding ways to help people that are facing displacement find new housing and provide the financial support needed to transition to new housing in cases where this occurs. So there's several references to that within the comprehensive plan, because as you know, the comprehensive plan, and this was mentioned in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, has a whole host of goals, some of which relate to land use and development, which on one side of this you have with the plan unit development request, but then it has another set of goals which are about people and how people that we are most vulnerable in the city are treated with care, and that we're finding solutions to their changing life as a result of the development that's happening in the city. So both areas of the comprehensive plan were referenced multiple times in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, but I think the area that you're speaking to directly is those goals within the comp plan that speak to helping people that otherwise would face displacement and not have the means to really manage that change.
And Madam Mayor, just to follow up there, I can do some looking up on some of the specific ones. I think at the end of tonight, maybe when staff comes back, if you are able to pull any of those up, just so we can see the specific ones that they referred to. And I can give you those as well, but they're on page 94 of the transcript or page 183 of the entire packet.
Madam Mayor. Tim, with respect to the request from Intermountain for Housing on mediation, has there been a conversation with the parties to determine whether there's willingness to engage in mediation on this issue?
We have not had that conversation yet, council member.
Madam Mayor, what's the procedure in order to do that, Tim? Because I would actually like to recommend that the parties seriously consider mediation.
Well, my understanding is that that's an action of council to give that direction.
Yes, so it would be an action of council. So what's entirely appropriate is that you ask both parties if they're willing, because council could demand mediation, but mediation works when both parties are willing. So if you would like to ask that question, make a motion related to that, it's entirely appropriate. It's a decision that council would ultimately make.
I actually would like to ask if parties are willing to do a mediation. I mean, I guess I'll state my concern here, right, especially having represented vulnerable populations in this area, is that, you know, there's the possibility of still displacement by just regular landlord tenant law, right? They've got leases, they can terminate leases, or they can cease operations. So I'm concerned that the posture of potentially walking away from the ability, in light of the conditions that the Planning and Zoning Commission put, places this population in a vulnerable position regardless. And so I would like to determine if the parties are willing to engage in mediation. Maybe I overstepped. I'll wait for council.
What I'd like is
So I was just having a conversation with council about this. We can ask the parties right now, but mediation is more effective if it's narrowed in focus. So it actually would be advisable that we hear from all the parties. And then I think that would help council narrow the request if we've heard from the presentations as planned this evening. And then you all could determine if you'd like to make that ask with a narrowed focus based on what you've heard, and see if parties are willing.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Mhm.
if I may, it probably would help everybody if each person, the appellant and the respondent presenting, spent 2 minutes talking about whether they'd be willing to mediate and on what terms, because I think we're going to be taking that up later.
Madam Mayor, I
Yes.
have a question for Tim.
Yeah.
Tim, I need some clarification on the Uniform Relocation Act. Was that used as a guide in terms of compensation for relocation, or was it called into law as part of the standing of the case?
Well, it was used by the Planning and Zoning Commission as a guide for, because, you know, they were concerned about just choosing arbitrarily,
Right.
you know, amounts, for instance, to say, hey, you will help them at the amount of X per unit relocate. So to tie it to the Uniform Relocation Act gave them some sense of credibility around what those amounts would be, because the amounts within the Uniform Relocation Act are of course constantly updated to deal with the real costs of today.
So that makes sense. And I just want to hear from you that the Uniform Relocation Act does not apply in this case.
That's correct.
This was
That's-
just used as a guide.
That's right. That was
Okay.
just used as a guide. That's
Thank
right. Mm.
Madam Mayor, a question for Tim. So I want to make sure I understand the staff's position with respect to the applicant's appeal. And I think the staff's recommendation is affirm the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision to add those 3 additional conditions because that finding and determination by the Planning and Zoning Commission was supported by the element of the PUD test that says, look to the comprehensive plan. And then in particular, the comprehensive plan considers the well-being of vulnerable populations in our city, displacement, the types of issues that frankly animate this emotionally are supported in the comprehensive plan, and therefore their decision has a basis in the PUD test. Is that right?
Mayor, Councilmember Bajan, that's correct. And I would just add that there was also a significant amount of testimony before the Planning and Zoning Commission. So in their public hearing, they were responding also to what the concerns were that were expressed in their hearing, which was an extensive one.
Thank you.
Anything further for Tim? All right, thank you. Now we will move to the appellant, Intermountain Fair Housing Council. Welcome.
Is this asking whether we would participate in?
Both. So
Med-
your
mediation.
presentation, as well as the council member asked that you address the question about mediation.
So I'll take that first really quickly. I'm Monica Babby with Intermountain Fair Housing Council. Located at 4696 West Overland Road, 83705, and I live at 630 South Curtis Road, 83705. I speak on behalf of appellate IFHC. And I would say that IFHC would be happy to participate in a mediation process and is hopeful that something can be reached that would make all parties satisfied. With regard to our appeal, Boise considers a planned unit development to be a procedure that provides an opportunity for creative land development and preserves natural features, allows efficient provision of services, and provides common open spaces and other amenities not found in traditional lot-by-lot development. Planned developments are intended to provide certain benefits to the public and to the developer, which may include a variety of housing types, reduction in lot sizes, modified building setbacks, and phasing plans. So the city had every right to deny the destruction of 115 assisted living housing options so that an investment company could increase its profits, and should have, because preservation of housing options is an important pillar to include all people in the community. For example, as our community continues to experience growth in rising housing prices, the city of Boise recently preserved the existing affordable housing of a mobile home park. The city purchased Sage Mobile Home Park, a 2-acre mobile home park located in Boise Bench. Also recently, another large investment company was granted its CUP on conditions that protected the residents at Reidenbaugh Apartments. While actually purchasing the property to preserve it is one option, so is using the right the city reserves to deny a PUD to preserve the types of housing available within a community and make Boise better. Boise SHLLC, the LLC, expressed no appreciation for the city's grace and comes here to argue that they should be granted more grace. They argued that if these site-specific conditions remain, they will significantly exacerbate the economic burdens that will render the proposed new use of the property impossible and will result in a shutdown. While no one wants to see a shutdown, for the families depending on this housing resource, what the LLC wants to do is already a shutdown. The LLC purchased this property as an assisted living facility with all the burdens that carries, and now wishes for special exceptions to remove this precious resource from the community. The city code is not intended to bail out LLCs that enter into highly regulated industry with a poor business plan. It is intended to make Boise a livable, desirable community for all residents. If the LLC wants out from under its burden, it should consider selling to an entity that wishes to run the property as an assisted living facility. The LLC argues that the issue of the last meeting was limited to whether notice was proper, and the city had no grounds to place conditions on its approval, but the city always had grounds to place conditions on a PUD. These conditions are not enough. They should be more beneficial to the current residents, or the approval should not be granted. The conditions do not amount to a complete economic taking, as the LLC suggests. Multiple properties like this have models that are workable, with a solid business plan, this company should be able to operate as profitably as any other assisted living facility in Boise. The LLC chose this property with all of its burdens. Considering federal, state, and city law, residents have a constitutional property interest in their rental properties, and their reliance on the federal, state, and city laws that protect them being observed. It is notable that while the LLC now argues that the city had no right to condition approval on the conditions that the city presented, the LLC actually proposed conditions of its own. And approval based on conditions is not unprecedented in recent decisions in which residents of Boise were being displaced. When the LLC offered conditions, it waived any argument that conditions were unconstitutional or unreasonable on principle. When the LLC bought an assisted living facility, the obligations, burdens of IDAPA and the existing leases and care agreements and its licensure obligations came with that purchase, as did an implied commitment to the community into which it reached. If they wanted a property free and clear of those burdens, they should have purchased undeveloped land or an old hotel to refurbish. These conditions do not interfere with any contract between the LLC and any tenant. This would be an obligation to the city in exchange for the city's approval that is greater than its contractual obligation to the tenants. No lease would require revision. While the city may be under the impression that there are no HUD requirements related to the property, such terminology is broad and misleading. The city and the LLC are both always prohibited from violating the Fair Housing Act, and the city and possibly the LLC have a duty to affirmatively further fair housing. IFHC believes that the city made a Fair Housing Act error in not weighing the foreseeable results of a decision to grant the PUD because it is foreseeable that this decision only adversely affects people with disabilities and may force people with such disabilities into more institutionalized care, including hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, and the move alone will exacerbate the disabilities of people who experience dementia. This does not even address the fact that some people may not be able to secure suitable housing and could end up homeless. Since this is foreseeable, it takes this land use decision from a possible disparate impact claim under the Fair Housing Act to a disparate treatment claim. There is or was no known person living at Arbor Village that has expressed that this action is not adverse to their protected class and their disability-related interests. Additionally, when accepting CBDG funds, other federal funding, the city agreed to affirmatively further fair housing. As such, the city erred approving any plan or program that adversely affects a disproportionate number of people of any particular protected class. To make the changes to the LLC has expressed an interest in, it will likely violate the Idaho Administrative Procedures Act, IDAPA regulations that protect people with disabilities living in assisted living facilities in Idaho. 160322.170.02 is the state code for the rules of licensure, residential and assisted living facilities in Idaho. 16.03.22.107.102.136 supersedes any program of any political subdivision of the state which licenses or sets standards for facilities. 16.03.22.107.02 and 0.03 requires that a facility cooperate to maintain its license. 16.03.22.97 lays out the limited reasons that an assisted living facility may transfer residents, and they are violation of the rules by the resident, violation of resident rights by another resident, the facility becoming unlicensed, but an entity's aforementioned duty to cooperate to maintain licensure prevent intentionally losing licensure. There is a present and imminent danger. The LLC testified in hearing that they would transfer residents to appropriate alternative facilities, but they have no authority to do so if the resident does not volunteer for such transfer, and none of the limited reasons within the law support a transfer. City and law policy. The city has a policy of analyzing demand for housing decisions. It is called a demand analysis. This is input as evidence that gives the city reasons to deny the PUD altogether. When considering how to estimate housing demand, the city's demand analysis considers earlier approaches, additional factors such as cost-burden households, homelessness, need for consideration to promote opportunities for Boise populations and to stem poverty through an equity lens that considers marginalized communities most drastically affected by the changes in the housing market. The city's own internal analysis indicated that in 2016, the overall population of seniors in Boise and Ada County was projected to increase from approximately 55,000 to 67,000. This is a 27% increase over 10 years. According to the Boise City Needs Assessment 2015, over half of the seniors in Boise that are 75 years or older have disability. According to the Boise City Idaho analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, June 2016, 1,400 very low-income elderly renters and homeowners already report having a housing problem as defined by HUD, which are defined as either lacking complete kitchen or plumbing facilities, overcrowded, or as a cost-burdened household. Of those senior renters at the very lowest income levels, 50.1% to 80%, 31.1 to 50%, and 30% AMI or below, 68%, 68%, and 79% respectively experience one or more of the housing problems already. This highlights the urgent need by the city to increase quality housing options for very low income and disabled seniors instead of removing over 115 units of supportive housing from our specialized senior disabled housing inventory. While the LLC contends that the city does not have a statutory authority to impose condition, the city has implied authority, precedented authority, and there is no authority conflicting the city's implied and precedent authorities. The city's conditions may even be less arduous than the IDAPA regulations for failing to maintain licensure, which lend credence to the city's implied authority to impose conditions on the discretionary approval. Finally, as a reminder, Boise SHLLC proposed conditions and now indicates an unwillingness to comply with conditions, which makes one wonder as to the good faith of Boise SHLLC's word. The city's decision to approve was not supported by substantial evidence to approve the PUD. Boise SHLLC did not offer a credible information as to their transfer of residence met the requirement of the IDAPA for involuntary transfer. The LLC provided no credible evidence that they had grounds for involuntary transfers of residence, considering their IDAPA obligations to coordinate with maintaining licensure. They provide no credible evidence that their planned conversion would not adversely impact 100% disabled population. While the LLC argues that the number of people being housed would not be affected because the conversion of 1-bedroom units to 2-bedroom units, but this notion was disputed. It is not disputed that the conversion represents a net loss of 150 units of our city's supported housing inventory from 115 to 17 units of unsupported housing, a 33% decrease in overall housing. Notwithstanding the incredibly callous comparison of some of the most vulnerable human beings in our community to fuel tanks, the analogy of converting from a gas station to a cafe is a good, but ignores evidence. Both have specific state and federal regulatory requirements, and in removal of gas tanks and transferring people with disabilities. The city would not allow a gas station to remove its tanks without meeting health, safety, and environmental requirements of the state and federal government. But in this case, the LLC has not provided any evidence that it has proper grounds for removing any residents involuntarily, or that it has a viable plan that complies with the FHA or IDAPA. Arbitrary and capricious. The city may not make arbitrary and capricious decisions in discretionary matters. To avoid capricious decisions, it may not make a decision that contradicts constitutional, state, or federal laws. To avoid an arbitrary decision, the city may not contradict its own relevant policies, including a demand analysis or a comprehensive plan. There are 6 conditions of approval for approving a PUD via 11-03-047, with the final one being the proposed use is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Idaho Code 67-6512 Local Land Use Planning Act, LUPA statute states a special use permit may be granted to an applicant if the proposed use is not in conflict with the plan. As demonstrated earlier in the decision to approve the PUD conflicted with residents' constitutional property interests, the FHA and IDAPA, since the comprehensive plan makes a special call out to exercise additional care when it comes to housing for our city's most vulnerable populations. IFHC asserts that the Planning and Zoning Commission erred in relying entirely on the provisions from zoning code and ignoring any comprehensive plan positions that are in opposition to the applicants, such as the housing programs with regard to the PUD. The LLC compares the taking of fees to the transfer of liquor licenses, which the state of Idaho grants to cities the limited authority to transfer liquor licenses within their city limits, with the conditions of the city placed on approval for the LLC's planned unit development. The analogy fails because in this matter, the city's approval is not mandatory or governed by the legislated law. It is discretionary, and it is common for cities to require conditions when a project is being assessed for approval based on whether it betters the community. Cities are only limited by states in their authority by the law that particularly prohibits its authority. No such state law prohibits the city from placing conditions, even expensive ones, on the approval of a discretionary land use. The city does not place conditions on the current use of the land, and the LLC can continue using the property in the way that it was originally planned. But if it wants the city to use its discretion to allow a change in the planned use that was originally granted by right under the city planning and zoning code, that adversely affects over 90 disabled people, it is reasonable that the city require conditions for the protection of those residents in exchange for the approval of discretionary use. Obviously,
Excuse me. We've ran over a little bit ago.
Apologies.
I'll ask if there are any questions for the appellant.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Monica, I have some questions about the payer sources for the individuals that are in the assisted living facility. Are these questions that you can answer? I don't quite understand the relationship, if there's an official relationship between the residents and your organization. If you could just help me understand, if you'd be the best person to ask about that.
Each person in the residential home will have its own case-by-case resources, but if your questions are general, I may be able to field them.
Okay. Do you have an idea of how many of these residents are receiving Medicaid services that pay for their assisted living stay?
Since we don't represent every one of the people there, I can't give a percentage or a particular number. But I can say that a fair number of people do, and the applicant may be able to be more specific about that.
Another question.
And Lori can probably shed
Okay,
more.
another question about that, Madam Mayor, is it's generally a standard practice at facilities that if someone is going to eventually be a Medicaid resident, that they have 1-2 year period where they private pay, even if they can't afford it. Maybe the family chips in, which kind of negatively would affect a resident who has paid privately, even if they can't afford it, with the expectation that they would receive Medicaid services later. So I'm curious if that was an oral or written arrangement at the facility, and if we have any idea if there are any residents that were under those expectations.
Councilman Nash, I happen to be able to answer that question because my mother-in-law for a brief period was there before this management. And at that time, there was a verbal explanation that they could live there paying privately until they spent down the amount of money that was the resource of the patient or resident. And that at that point in time, they would allow them to continue in Medicaid. And that was the same thing that we heard from all of the assisted livings. Most of them indicated that they would not take someone who was already on Medicaid. And so I can't speak to the exact policy of appellate applicants. And so I think it would be only fair to let them field that question themselves as well. But Lori might be able to give a little bit more information about.
I was just going to add, I know we have one client from the facility that's an IFHC client, and that is the case with her. She spent down her savings to be there, was promised it would be her forever home, and now is looking at being displaced, and without any private pay, any savings, et cetera, it'll be much more challenging to find a place for her to go.
Madam Mayor and Lori, to answer the first question, do you have an idea of what share of residents are Medicaid recipients?
I think the applicant can confirm, but I think it's at least 50% is my understanding. And I got that information from them. So.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I guess I need to be educated a little bit too. I think it's probably a Lori question, but is this how the podium dance, is this how this usually works? That you pay a private amount out of pocket initially, then that money is consumed, then Medicaid steps in. Is the Medicaid payment lower monthly than the private amount?
I believe so, yes. There's some people who
But I'm just gonna, I'm
facilities.
sorry,
Yeah.
I need only the person at the mic to be answering for the
Yeah.
record.
That's my understanding, yes.
And then in exchange, it's common to have a promise to keep the tenant at the facility or the property until the tenant no longer will be there. I guess what I'm trying to get my head around is like, and I'm not saying this is the business model here, but is there a business model where you collect a lot of elderly people's savings up front in return for a promise to keep them for a long time at the lower Medicaid payment, and then close down the business and profit maybe more than was represented to people?
I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but I mean, one might surmise that sort of stuff happens in different communities.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
I want to be clear that I understand what you're asking in your testimony. So I think what you're asking is that we just denied the PUD. But then I'm also kind of wondering if that's the case, like, then what are the next steps and what is the best interest of the folks that live there? Because my observation, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is that, we heard this in front of planning and zoning, and what they saw was that like the best thing that we think we can do to address the needs in the comprehensive plan with these vulnerable community members is try to figure out conditions that can help them going forward. And I think what I hear you saying is those conditions don't really matter. We just want the application shut down. Is that?
Our argument is that the PUD should be denied, that the business should be continued running as an assisted living. And I understand that the applicant has indicated that they can't afford to do that, which means they may need to look for a buyer who can afford to do that. They have responsibilities under IDAPA to run it as that kind of a business until everyone is either has voluntarily left or they have a licensure to keep, and they have to comply with IDAPA for as long as they're running that business. So, whether they run it or another entity that they find to take it over runs it, either way, that keeps that housing option as an assisted living for those families that live there, regardless of who runs that facility.
Madam Mayor, just following up there. So there really are no conditions that we could put in place here. You're just asking that the application be denied.
If the city was to choose to not deny the PUC or PUD, pardon me, thank you. IFHC would participate in negotiating whatever conditions were in the best interest of the families that live there and that were satisfactory to the applicant.
And then, Madam Mayor, one follow-up question there. So do you know what those are?
Do I know what they are right now?
Because if there isn't an agreement to go into mediation, there's a chance that the council is going to have to put on some of those additional conditions tonight, or would have an opportunity to put on some of those additional conditions tonight. So do you know what those additional conditions, any of them would be?
Do you want to field this one?
I would definitely just add one more, which for this population, transportation is hugely challenging. A lot of people are in wheelchairs or have mobility issues, and to be transported to look at other facilities is, trying and costs a lot of money out of pocket. So we'd like to see something added for transportation. For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I don't expect to be voting, but I'm just going to pick up the mediation request again because I'm trying to understand, especially since having it narrowed is important. I hear you both saying we should deny this. And in my mind, then mediation wouldn't work if that's your line of, going into mediation. But then I also hear you say you'd like to be involved in negotiating the conditions. So what is it in your request for mediation were you anticipating would be mediated?
Exactly what Lori said, that they would also get transportation help to look at new facilities. And I have to point out that the mediation request that IFHC submitted was denied, and that the mediation request that we're talking about is the one from an actual affected party, someone who lives on the facility. And so their wishes may be more specific.
Okay, that's
And
the
we should ask
mediation
them about
request that
theirs.
was only sent though to me and to Tim Keen today, correct?
Yeah, so there are two different ones. IFHC submitted one, and an affected party person, I can't remember the language, also submitted one. So there's two. And the intent is that basically, can we explore as a community a way to save this like critical infrastructure that we haven't had the time or intention or the willingness to do so. And there have been some preliminary meetings to talk about options, like some federal funding, other ways to save those Medicaid beds for our community, but there just hasn't been enough time. It could be, a multi-week or month process to get all the parties to the table to have those kind of discussions. And I think that's the intent behind the request for mediation.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
I'm going to go first with Councilmember Bajent and then back over here to Nash.
Okay, a couple of things, because I think we're going to be discussing mediation later. Think about it for your rebuttal. We can't have you coming to us and saying, we represent one individual client and then also this group in this appeal. We're willing to mediate, but then the interest of our one individual client might be adverse to the mediation and could cause a problem. We need some kind of consolidated representation from you that you can mediate on behalf of everybody. Otherwise, you've got a conflict of interest and we don't know what to do with it.
Sure.
Second, we're not going to vote to permit the application and then do a mediation. And you don't want that anyway. You don't want to mediate after you've lost. So what we're going to talk about at the end of this is whether to mediate this at all. And I think what the mayor is trying to get from you is what specifically would you be willing not to bring to the table, but to negotiate or talk about in that mediation, if that's the direction we go.
Yeah, I think primarily other ways to keep the facility open, I think, is our main interest.
Okay.
As an assisted living facility.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Madam Mayor, I have a question for Mr. Keen, if he would yield. Mr. Keen, it's my understanding that there is the planning and zoning is acted on the modern zoning code. And I just want to understand, how would applications that we're considering now be affected should the zoning code change during this process? For example, do old applications get grandfathered in under the old rules, or if a new application emerges after the zoning code changes, how would that affect this?
Well, yes, approvals that occur before the new zoning ordinance is adopted would be subject to the rules that were in place when that approval occurred. So it wouldn't be until the effective date of the new ordinance that you'd be operating under the new rules. And council will make that decision regarding the effective date when this comes to you in June.
Further questions? Thank you. And now we will hear from the applicant.
My name is Michael Seaman. My name is Michael Seaman. I am the Vice President at DiNapoli Capital Partners. We're the owner of Arbor Village. Our company corporate address is 3021 Citrus Circle, Suite 130, and that's Walnut Creek, California, 94598. Madam Mayor, members of the council, we're here to respectfully request that the council affirm PUD 22-3, but remove the three site-specific conditions, number 2, number 3, and number 4. And there are a few reasons we're making this request. First, the commission's decision to impose the 3 conditions exceeds its statutory authority. In imposing these conditions, we're talking about government overreach into private agreements. We have individual leases with each and every resident. These leases have been reviewed and approved by the state licensing agency. These leases have been reviewed and signed by our residents and their families. These are terms they agreed to. The leases provide that the lease may be terminated with 30 days advance notice by either party. This is a binding contract between us and the residents. If this right to terminate is exercised, there are no conditions required, no payments required, no moving fees, nothing. With its conditions, the commission is unlawfully inserting itself into a private agreement and seeking as a government entity to interfere with and amend a private contract.
Madam Mayor, I've read that in your memo, but I didn't understand it. You can't just contract around the law. And the point that was made in the Planning and Zoning Commission was, if you are going to receive this benefit in a change in land use, you need to do some things to take care of some people. And one of the things you need to do is make one of your lease terms that you'll be performing more generous by giving them more notice. So it's not interfering with contract. You're asking for a benefit from the city. And the city is saying, yes, we can do that if you change your behavior a little bit. So I didn't understand it. Can you explain it for me better?
I think we'll propose something later that hopefully meets in the middle, is a little bit more palatable to everybody, if that's okay.
Okay, so you're not making the argument that we're interfering with a contract in an unconstitutional
Well,
way.
I think the question is that this, the lease has been approved by the state licensing agency, and we've checked with a lot of people, lawyers, attorneys, about our ability to follow that lease, and we're okay. And I understand your point that we're asking for something special.
Do you think the state licensing agency would say no if you change the lease to give your residents more generous terms?
No, I don't.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I want to jump on that because I was very confused about that. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Yes, question. Just to clarify, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you just argued, or just saying that you've entered into a month-to-month lease with every tenant.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And that's standard for the industry. Second, these conditions actually violate the law. Many of our residents use government funds to pay for our services through Medicaid. There are very strict financial requirements to qualify for Medicaid, including income and asset requirements. This is closely monitored. The commission's conditions include payments to these residents. However, not only would such payments be fraudulent and potentially illegal under Medicaid rules, such payments could actually result in the resident being removed from the Medicaid program entirely, which would leave them in a substantially worse position. Next, we struggle to understand how the specific conditions were arrived at, as there doesn't appear to be any explanation given. For example, at the last hearing, the Intermountain Fair Housing Council filed an appeal requesting 90 to 120-day advance notice to vacate. I stood in front of the commission and indicated we plan to offer 120 days advance notice. Yet the commission arbitrarily arrived at a 1-year requirement. More importantly, the commission has provided no analysis or explanation as to how these conditions imposed are necessary to remediate any negative impact to a tenant and the community as a whole. While I believe the commission had good intentions, the imposed conditions don't actually address the problem. In fact, I believe they do the opposite and potentially make it worse. We started this process because of financial burdens that we and the industry as a whole face. Like any business, we hope that our income is enough to pay our expenses. When our revenue drops and our expenses jump dramatically, that is a recipe for disaster. And that's the problem we currently face.
Madam Mayor, don't worry, when we do this, your time pauses, so I'm not.
Okay.
When did you purchase the property in the business?
2019.
2019. There was some discussion earlier with I guess, nominally the appellant here, about a business model where you take assets up front, spend those down, the person then qualifies for Medicaid. You take the Medicaid payments and not in perpetuity, but for as long as they're available. You keep talking about this industry trend or this shortfall that everybody's facing. Like, how is that not anticipated?
So when we bought this community, our intent was not to be here today. We bought it as a senior housing community. We invested several $million in renovating it with the intent of making it better. Anyone who was in the community before we bought it can attest to the differences between prior ownership and us.
I guess the question, maybe a better way to put the question is, what about that financial picture I just described was unanticipated? Did you spend more than you thought you would to fix it up?
Predominantly, they're COVID inflation impacts.
They're what?
COVID and inflation impacts.
Okay.
So the staffing costs to, if you just compare 2020 to today, have gone up about $1 million. And that's all surprise to anyone in the industry. And so I think generally what we've seen is the demand for our product has decreased, to talk economically, and the expense load, just as anyone who goes to the grocery store and you buy eggs or juice or anything, the expense load has increased dramatically.
I think the sense, I'll just be really direct, and I hope you take it as me really being direct.
Yeah, please do.
The sense and the concern is that somebody from out of state has come and bought a property that very vulnerable people live in, sucked the value out of it, and is now trying to suck some more value out of it by changing the land use. And that's the vibe here. So I need the reasons why I should really believe that that's not true.
Yeah. So there's no value to be sucked out, honestly.
Well, there's the redevelopment. There's a PUD that will generate tremendous value.
So to date, and the next thing I was going to talk about is since 2020. So we started on an upswing. In 2020, COVID hit. Obviously the industry was impacted a lot there with trying to protect our residents. We've lost over $2 million since then. So we haven't extracted any value. We've been coming out of pocket every month to support this community. And I think any other business that loses money for 3 years in a row to that tune would have closed long ago. So we've been trying to keep this afloat in an attempt to get to a point where we can actually run a sustainable business. But I think the point that we're getting to is that 3 years is a long time to be funding something, and we're just running out of funds.
Okay. Anything else to allay those background emotional concerns?
It's an incredibly challenging situation. I don't want to be here. We've never done this before. I understand that it's a terrible situation to be in. I think, I'll jump around a little bit, something that's going to cover later, but this is happening across the industry. And there are numerous communities that are just closing. And some of them give 30-day notice. Some of them just say, we're closing tomorrow, and kick the residents out. We're trying to avoid that. We've tried to avoid that. But there's a reality that we can't continue to prop up something where, this is a broader issue particularly with Medicaid, where the funding the government provides is about a quarter of what it costs to provide the service. And that's, again, a terrible problem and one that people are trying to solve, but we can't bear the burden of propping up what's a political and a federal issue of Medicaid funding.
Fair. I've soaked up a bunch of time. Just one more, so I really understand it.
Yeah.
Medicaid funding provides a quarter of what it costs to operate, but it would have provided 100% of your cost to operate if not for COVID and inflation?
No. Medicaid has always fall well short of what someone would pay.
So when you bought it, you knew that you wouldn't be able to run it profitably.
No. So we stopped admitting new Medicaid residents, as a lot of owners do. Okay. And I think, again, the main thing that's changed is that the wage we pay someone for any role has gone up so dramatically that what you expect it to cost to run a community, it has doubled. And I think you see that at, Starbucks, Chipotle, McDonald's. Someone who was making $12 an hour 3 years ago is making 20. And when you add that across the board, it changes the picture dramatically from what everyone thought 3 years ago.
Thank you. You've been very indulgent with some very uncomfortable questions.
No,
really, we're here on a technical PUD,
Yeah.
so I appreciate you answering me.
Anything else? Sorry. Okay.
You're safe.
So I may repeat myself a little bit because I'm going in order, but I mean, like I said, since 2020, we've lost almost $2 million of the business, and it's not getting better. We're on pace to lose $1 million in 2023. And so we're losing a huge amount of money each month. And frankly, we just don't have the ability to continue to fund this community. And like I said, any other business that has lost money for 3 years in a row would have just closed its doors long ago. And in asking us to pay relocation expenses and cover any rent variance for 3 years, we're being asked to come up with money that we just frankly don't have. And it's just not an option for us. And so these conditions are taking a financially untenable situation and making it worse. I think, as we heard before, the proposed use is appropriate for this particular site. This has been obvious throughout this process, and the evidence supports that. The planners recommended this for approval multiple times. The commission found that our proposed use met the land use requirements for a PUD, and there are multiple comments that supported this as well. The hang up, of course, as you mentioned, is the human side. And I agree that this makes this process really challenging. But let me ask a question. If we had started this process with a vacant building, I think we can all agree that we would not be here today. The plan would have been approved long ago with no additional conditions. There would be no human element to consider. If we look at another scenario, and let's go back in time and say we gave 30-day notice as our leases allow, we vacated the building, and then afterwards we started this process and applied for a change of use to multifamily. Would you look back at how we handled the notices in transition in deciding the CUP should be approved and what conditions to attach? I doubt it. The conditions could not even be applied to a vacant building. Instead, you would see a vacant building with another potential use, multifamily apartments, that would help fill a housing need and approve that use. So I ask what the legal distinction is between these scenarios and the position we're in. In essence, we're being penalized for making an effort of going above and beyond what is legally required. I note that multiple of our competitors in Boise have closed their doors. Some have given 30-day notice, some have given none. Arguably, we could have done the same thing and been in a much better position than we are today. Instead, we've offered more than required, and the result is a set of conditions that is punitive. I've been in this industry for over 10 years, and I realize that senior housing is a major issue for our senior population, especially those with limited resources. But we're being unfairly asked to bear the burden of these problems that are outside of our control. We're not given any time to discuss or negotiate these conditions. We just had a set of ambiguous conditions placed on us, which we believe are well beyond what the commission has to do. The unfortunate reality is that the current use is not working and is not sustainable as a business. The conditions as shown do not solve that problem. In one last attempt to find a workable solution, we put together a proposal that is feasible from our perspective, significantly exceeds our obligations to terminate tenancies under both state and federal standards, and is compliant with Medicaid rules. We'll substantially comply with 2 of the 3 conditions. We'll voluntarily add a condition to hire a third party to assist the tenants with the process of finding a new home and moving. And we'll do so despite having a legal right to vacate everyone with 30-day notice and no additional assistance. Condition 4 is essentially a blank check. It is not acceptable, and we think not even legal for many of our residents.
Madam Mayor, can you go back and tell me what you are willing to do?
Yeah.
I was trying to take notes, and those are perfect. Thank you.
To summarize, we'll give the existing tenants at least 6 months prior written notice to vacate the facility. After the notice to vacate is given and upon identification of new housing for each existing tenant, we will pay for relocation expenses consistent with the cost schedule of the Uniform Relocation Act, subject to our ability to do so legally. Condition 4 would be removed, and we would add a condition that states that after a notice to vacate is provided, we will hire a third party to assist the tenants with the process of finding a new home and moving.
What is it that makes you think you may not be able to legally pay relocation expenses?
The Medicaid piece.
You wouldn't be reimbursed by Medicaid for it.
No, it's not a matter of being reimbursed. It's a matter of providing resources to someone on Medicaid that may potentially force them outside of the income and asset requirements.
That would make them not subject to Medicaid. That wouldn't be illegal for you to do. I can give my grandma lots of money.
From what I understand, that would make them not subject, and there are limits to what we can do as a enrolled Medicaid provider.
But you're leaving the business.
We're still covered by Medicaid rules. If we're allowed to do it, we'll do it. I'm just putting an asterisk because it's a complicated Medicaid system, and I don't want to.
I admittedly don't know a lot about it, so thank you.
That was an attorney. Make sure you put that in there. But our intent is to pay. If it causes someone to get unenrolled from Medicaid, I think we have to be careful of that.
Okay, thank you.
So I just have a clarifying question on that too. So you're referring to Medicaid laws, excuse me, not the possibility that then you would refute the legality of this council requiring you to do this.
I'm not sure I follow the question. So if our goal would be to provide this payment. If for some reason there was an issue with Medicaid laws where we were either told we can't do it or the resident would lose their eligibility under Medicaid, we would have to see if there's a workaround.
Sure. I'd like to hear the other answer too, because this is important. And it's something that the Planning and Zoning Commission tacked on. A PUD is not allowed by right. So this was something that they determined was appropriate. You've contested the appropriateness of that and made legal arguments that it wasn't legal for them to require you to do this. So I want to make sure that in this subject to ability to do so legally, it's not the next tack on or follow on of the argument that you're making that it wasn't legal, that this be required.
No, with this.
That this
specific-
is strictly related to Medicaid.
Correct. With this specific condition, this is strictly related to Medicaid. Our intent is to make this payment to every resident
Okay.
unless there is a Medicaid specific issue.
All right,
But
thanks.
like I said, Medicaid is very complicated. I am far from an expert. And I think we just want to make sure we're not doing anything that gets us or them in
Okay.
legal trouble.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
can you give just a little more context on the additional condition, what you mean or who you're anticipating would be a third party and what type of services they would provide?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are some questions at the last hearing about, what we were willing to do and the transition plan we provided and what that actually meant. And so we thought if we brought in a third party who had experienced this industry, experience helping seniors move, we would still help as much as we can. But if we're bringing in a person who has experience in this, we can point to them and say they're an expert in this. They can help us do that. And you're not looking at us to say, does Mike really stand behind what he's saying? We will have a person who's done this and can do this. And hopefully that's more reassuring to people.
Madam Mayor, follow up. So when you envision what that service would be, are we talking like a realtor type service? Are we talking maybe responding to the appellant's arguments on transportation assistance, right? I'm just
Yeah,
curious,
so-
what are you envisioning that they will do for your residents?
So 2 comments. We actually have a bus and a driver. So we drive our residents around to events, doctors, et cetera. We could utilize that to take them to other communities if they had that desire. As for the first question, I think there are options there are consultants in this industry that can help. There are also people or companies called referral agent companies, which basically step in and help the senior navigate that process. So they will come meet with them, figure out what their needs are, help them pick a new community which fits their needs, and basically walk them through the whole process, start to finish.
Madam Mayor. Couple things. First is just an ask for some folks in the audience. I'm really trying hard to pay attention to everything that the speakers are saying and when you're up there as well. So any sort of gestures or things like that, it is distracting. So please try your best not to. I realize it's a most issue, so it's hard. But here's my question. So one of the I realize you're not done with this presentation. It's going to wait till the end. But since we're really kind of picking
one other thing I
apart.
wanted to say. So
Okay,
go ahead.
perfect. Since we're kind of looking and picking apart some of these conditions, one of the things that was brought up to us was the possibility of mediation. And I think that the conditions are probably where that mediation, would occur. And so I guess my question for you is are you open to mediation to talk about these conditions?
We've put a lot of thought into this, and I never want to say no entirely to something, but I think a lot of the driving force behind this is our financial position, and we're not in a position to drag this out for 6 months or a year or 2 years. And the last sentence I was going to say that we're hoping we could obtain relief from as we propose, and we can agree on these conditions. But if not, we're just going to withdraw our application and exercise our rights as our leases say, or whatever else we're entitled to do. I mean, we're at the point where I think things are bad and we're struggling. We need a resolution, and I don't know what else would come out through mediation or what other things are being requested. It was a bit of a surprise to us today. That's the first time we heard of it. So putting me on the spot a little bit, but that's my initial reaction.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'm going to follow up, and this question is going to come up again throughout the process. So I'm not going to make that be your final answer. So one of the things I think that that you brought up is you thought that the Planning and Zoning Commission was arbitrary and capricious. Where did they come up with these numbers? Well, they pointed specifically to the Uniform Relocation Act. And I realized that we as a city aren't here to enforce that, but they were pointing it to guidance. So they would be saying that these aren't arbitrary. There actually is a guiding document that would tell us where we would find these types of conditions. And so I would love just to have your response of like, how is that arbitrary when they are pulling it from a very specific area that they referenced in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting?
I think there's probably some questions about, given there was an appeal in the last hearing that was asking for a certain time period and we offered more. I think that surprised us a little bit, but I mean, just being fully transparent, I know there's a lot of discussion about 6 months versus 12 months or 4 months. I mean, again, I think we're in the spot where like these things don't address, there's an urgent need, and that's why we're here. Like there's a problem that some of these conditions just make worse, and we're trying to figure out a way to move forward with that.
Madam Mayor, if I could follow up on a different question. So we, two questions if I can. So one of the things that you're bringing up tonight, and I don't remember you bringing up last time, I could be wrong because it was a long time ago. One of the things that you brought up tonight is that you have a high level of vacancy. And I have to imagine that a high level of vacancy doesn't help you pay the bills either. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what I'm curious about is, was that an issue the last time that you were here, or has there been an increase in vacancy since you started pursuing this? I would imagine that there may be some people who, once this process got started, said, hey, we're going to get out of here and we're going to try to start getting this ball moving to find another. So has the vacancy increased?
100%. We haven't done ourselves any favors. Obviously, every time this comes up, residents get concerned and some move out. I think if you look at Boise as a whole, there's vacancy. If you look at the industry as a whole across the country, there's vacancy. And so this isn't, we're here, but this isn't an us problem, right? The demand for our product has gone down. The expenses have gone up. I can rattle off competitors that are similar occupancy ranges and losing just as much money as or more.
Yeah. And then Madam Mayor, my final question, and I guess this comment there, I imagine that if you had the means to move out, if I would have had the means to move out, I would have been moving out after that last hearing. But if I didn't have any other place to go, then maybe that isn't as much of an option. One of the letters that we got is a joint letter, I believe, from a lot of the folks here. And one of the things they asked for, and I was just a little confused and I was wondering if you could help me with this, is they asked for a notice of 3 months moving expenses and $10,000 to reimburse each resident for the deposit paid to Arbor Village and to cover the cost of a deposit at a new facility. $10,000 seems like more than what most deposits are. I'm wondering if you know where that $10,000 number comes from. Is that something, is that a deposit that people put down, or if you can bring any light to that?
Most of our residents, when they move in, there's what's called a community fee. And again, this is industry standard. Sometimes it's waived. And basically what that covers is if you move into an apartment building, you just kind of move in, right? You bring your stuff, you show up. With seniors, there's a whole process that has to occur. A nurse has to do an assessment. We need to get your care plan set up. We need to get medication management set up. And so that fee is meant to cover that.
Yep.
And
is that ever reimbursed when people move out?
No, it's not.
Okay. And then, sorry, this will be my last question for now. So then what I guess is that if these folks moved to somewhere else, they would have to pay a similar fee. Was the fee when they moved into your place, is that a fee about $10,000?
No, it's right now we're $2,500 to $3,000.
For all the fees you just described.
Correct. And we waive it frequently, and I would argue that most other communities would probably do so too under that situation.
And you have documentation of who you waived it for?
Not with me, but yeah.
You do? Okay, great.
Madam Mayor. Generally, in my experience, occupancy rate is a big driver of revenue. It's often a result of management. I'm curious, what has your management been like there? How many executive directors have you had since 2019?
So we bought the community we're on our third. We use a nationally recognized management company that manages senior communities across the country. I think those answer 2 questions.
Have you been satisfied with the performance, having 3 managers in 4 years?
Again, as I said before, I think it's challenging going through this process, but it's not limited to us. I mean, I talked to other owners in Boise, and there's a building that is 100% full that was losing about $75,000 a month. They just started removing Medicaid residents by giving them 30-day notice because that was impacting their business. So do I think our management company could have done a little bit better? Like, we always think so, right? I mean, you always want improvement, always want to drive performance, but this is a problem that goes well beyond us because there are multiple communities in Boise that are in similar positions and trying to figure out what to do.
Madam Mayor. So I want to make sure I'm following some of the potential scenarios here. What I hear you saying is you're not able to make money.
Mhm.
You could, instead of doing all of these things and trying to be a good partner, you could essentially call up the leases for whatever those were negotiated at, close it up, and then try again with no one there. Is that what I heard you say?
I think we're trying to figure out what our options are because the current business is not working. Continuing to cut a check every month. We've been doing that for 3 years, and we don't have a bucket of money to continue pulling from. And I think if we don't get some relief, then we start exploring what our other options are in terms of vacating the building, selling. I think everything's on the table.
Madam Mayor, I have a follow-up. So as I look at these conditions from planning and zoning, and I'm sure you've run these numbers, I mean, how much would you be putting out per resident that's still here?
For
For
which
the ones
specific
that planning and zoning implemented, not your version of a revised
Well, I think that,
condition?
so there's two main issues. We're essentially agreeing to the relocation expense.
Hmm.
The one big issue is the rent variance for 3 years, which is unquantifiable. I mean, someone could move into the something that's double and just say, you should pay this. And I think the other problem is going from 6 months to 12 months just costs us 6 more months of expenses to run a community while we're losing money. And so shortening that period is less, for lack of a better words, cash burn.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead.
That was it.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. We're gonna take a break. Now, I try to take a break every hour and a half or so. We're just over that. So before we move into public testimony, we'll take a 10-minute break. All right, welcome back, everybody. We'll go ahead and start with public testimony. I've got folks that signed in and then also folks that signed up in advance that I've checked for being parties of record. So we'll start with them. First, Greg Anderson signed up to be online. Is Greg online? Oh, you're here. Okay, great. Come on up.
Madam Mayor, Council. As you said, my name is Greg Anderson. I live at 2549 East Satterfield Street, Meridian, 83646. And for more than a year, my wife and I have been performing musical entertainment at Arbor Village once a month. And more importantly, we also conduct church services there twice each month. And this isn't the only community we do this, but it is the only one that I know that's undergoing such a little turmoil here as they are at Arbor Village. So I just wanted to give you a face of somebody else that's not a resident, that's not an attorney, that has a feel for what's going on. And as usually is the case in church services, we speak with those in the congregation, in this case, the residents there, before and after the service, and we pray with them about issues in their lives. And for several months, one of the most frequent prayer requests was this. For these residents, Arbor Village is not just a building, it's their community. For them, the other residents and staff are neighbors and family, not just other people who occupy and work in the building. There is a saying on a wall that reads something to the effect of, remember, the residents don't live where we work in their home. And the staff there actually takes that to heart. Well, certainly part of the equation. At issue here tonight is not just a decision about their future use of the property. It is a decision that will impact the lives of dozens of elderly people, many of whom have limited options for living arrangements. These beautiful people have lived productive lives, for years contributing to society in general and specifically to the cities in which they have lived, including Boise. Now they're being told they will have to leave their home. However, before they can even do that, they must find another residence. before they could even think about leaving their forever home at Arbor Village. Now, there are other senior communities in the area, but again, this is their home. As a society, I'll tell you right now, I don't have the answers. I really don't. And as a society, I think this is a bigger picture question. We have to decide whether decisions will be driven primarily or even solely by financial factors, or if we will take a stand to protect the most vulnerable in our society, including the elderly. While I believe the P&Z missed an opportunity to send a stronger message along these lines by rejecting the rezoning request, I commend them for imposing some stricter requirements to at least provide additional assistance and time to allow the residents to transition to other communities. And while I recognize the existence and potential impacts of the law of unintended consequences, I strongly encourage you set a precedent and deny the appeal of the applicant and support the appeal of the appellant. I think I got them in the right order. And if that's not possible, then I do suggest that the mediation process would at least take place, because there are so many questions and so much was brought up tonight that I hadn't thought of before. And your heads are all spinning as well, I'm sure. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, sir. Next, we've got Kristen Pooley. Hey, Kristen, welcome.
So my name is Kristen Pooley and I live at 15.
Kristen, I'm sorry. It seemed to be on before. Will you try again?
Hello.
There we go.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm Kristen Pooley. I live at 1521 East Griffin Street in Meridian. So I'm here today I work with vulnerable populations, and I actually work with this age group right now. So I asked if they could bring up a website. So this is Boise Care Connections, and it shows us every week what Medicaid beds are available. As of today, I think we have maybe 10 if we're lucky. This is updated weekly. It's a good resource to kind of see how few options there are. So there was a lot brought up tonight between both parties that was helpful, but I just don't see that there's enough options out there for the people. I mean, if there's 10 beds today available and there's 30 or 40 or 50 people at the facility, how are they going to find beds? The facility, Arbor Village, I have talked to some of the family members there, and the bus doesn't take the Medicaid residents around. They have to find their own transportation to medical appointments. So how does that work if they can't find another home? So those are questions that I think are really important to be asking of the facility owner himself. Like, how is he going to facilitate it? And then at the February hearing, he said that him and his office workers shut down their office and they called around for the day and they said, oh, there's plenty of beds available. But are they Medicaid beds? He's not giving numbers on Medicaid. Does he have a Medicaid specialist that he would hire to help facilitate this? There's a lot of unanswered questions. So I think that, I hope that the commission takes all that into account. Again, there was a lot I learned as well through this, but this website really gives a really good view of what is not there resource-wise. And this also includes assisted living facilities, which is what they are currently living in, and it also includes skilled nursing facilities. No one can just go into a skilled nursing facility. So those beds are probably not even an option for the majority of the residents there. You have to be appropriately planned for care. So then you go through that list and you're like, okay, what assisted living facilities are an option? And the numbers just kind of keep going down and down and down. And I think it's a good resource to kind of give that broad view of what the residents are looking at. And again, they're a vulnerable population. So how are they going to see the facilities? How are they going to screen those facilities to see if it's the home that they want to live in? if they can't drive, if
Time.
they're dealing with, macular degenerate, sorry.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Madam Mayor, one question
Yes.
before you go.
Oh, one question, please, Kristen.
Hi. Just help me with your experience with the website. So we can't scroll through it, but I'm sure you're right that there's 10 beds, 10 Medicaid beds available now.
Yeah.
But what about over a period of 6 months to a year? So you can't put 30 people in 10 beds, but can you put 30 people in the open spaces on this website over the course of 6 months to a year?
If only one facility was competing, how many facilities are competing? There's a lot. Calls are being made every day to try and find homes and other facilities for people for Medicaid beds, and there just aren't many.
I guess I hear you. What I heard so far tonight is one way or the other, this facility is closing. It's
Yeah.
either going to be redeveloped or they threaten to just close their doors.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand if that process takes 6 months to a year. Based on your experience, do you think that these people would be able to get in through this resource, or are they going to be homeless?
Well, I've worked with a few people that have ended up homeless. I mean, we can look online on social media and see Boise Dev, Margaret Carmel. She has done great work at exposing that. We can talk to our homeless shelters right now and ask how many elderly, like over 60, 65, that are currently homeless and can't get into these facilities. You can't just go into these facilities. You have to be screened.
Okay.
All of
so
them.
that helps. So your basic point is this is how little is out there. It's
Yeah.
not going to be enough for many, many reasons. And that's really what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank
And
you.
I just wanted to offer that website because I don't feel like we're really seeing the picture here. And the picture, that's a big piece of it right there. It's updated every week.
Thank you very much.
So,
Madam Mayor, I have
Yes.
a question
Oh,
for
yeah.
Kristen as well. Kristen, this is a question in your experience working with this population. The applicant mentioned a third-party provider who might help with relocation assistance. Are you aware of anyone kind of currently doing that type of work in the Treasure Valley or even regionally?
I have heard of some, but that's not my expertise at all. There are some that do help facilitate that, but that's not my
Great.
expertise
Thank you.
there. So,
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristen. Tracy Snyder. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, everybody. I'm nervous. Hi, my name is Tracy Snyder. I live at 4470 North Linda Vista Lane, Boise, Idaho, 83704. I have been a nurse in this community for 28 years, and I can't even wrap my head around this. I'm here this evening to advocate for the residents. I think at least refunding them their deposits, which my mom's Medicaid, been there a year, she had to pay her deposit of $2,500. From this day forward to help them find and help them move into another facility. This morning, I looked up at the Boise Connection and I called all facilities that were on there. There are only 10 Medicaid beds in the assisted living. And I also called several of the skilled nursing facilities. And like she said, they do not meet their level of care criteria. There are 30 Medicaid residents at Arbor Village. I do know that there are 2 marketing and finance managers from senior living facilities that have attempted to speak to the acting administrator to offer their assistance to help in some of the residents finding rooms of the non-Medicaid. They are actually reducing some of the prices of their rooms to help the residents find new places. Their acting administrator denied. Arbor Village raised the rent anywhere from $300 to $600 per private pay residence this year in January. I know personally that they're actively still trying to get residents to move in. This Friday, the marketing manager called somebody and set up an appointment with them to show them their mother-in-law to move in right away. But I guess they don't mind going ahead and taking their money and their deposits, knowing that they're closing and they will not give it back. They also took on 3 hospice patients. And I say patients because they're not residents. Hospice are patients that are going through the end of life transition. They are in an acute situation and home health nurses are coming in to take care of them. This type of resident that they wouldn't be getting hospice unless they have been living in this facility for a while. But I guess, again, they don't mind taking their money. Hopefully, when they give their 30-day notice or 120-day notice, that it's not in the middle of their ending stage of life. Instead of moving more people in, the management and staff should be reaching out to programs that Boise Reach to help them move, find new homes, figure out financing to be able to live into a new home, should offer their own facility bus to drive their residents around to appointments and find places to live. It doesn't matter if you give 30 days, 120 days on that day after that day that they're supposed to move out, unless you give them help and assistance, they will still be there. My mother is Medicaid, and I've worked countless hours in the last 2 months, as well as trying to figure out a place for her to live and for these people. Luckily, I have found a place, but these other residents haven't, and they don't have anybody to help them. They can't drive, they don't drive, and that bus does not take the Medicaid patients to the hospital. They don't take them to and from their appointments. So for their bus to be helping them, he needs to buck up and tell them that they have to drive the Medicaid patients around. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Daniel Hutchinson, excuse me. Hi there, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Hutchison. I reside at 102 North Jantoni here in Boise, Idaho. I want to take a little different tack than we've been hearing tonight. But if we look at May 2023, to even be discussing closing a care facility that's housing our elderly is not only irresponsible, it's short-sighted and totally misunderstands history. The typical person that's moving into a care facility is in that 75 to 85 year range, and then they stay from 5 to 10 years afterwards. If we look back in history, what was happening 80 years ago, we were involved in World War II. Population, as far as new births, was very flat. So we have a low bubble of people that are born in that age group. Jump a couple years later to 1946, Boise was going through a massive housing shortage and a massive maternity ward shortage as the pent-up demand for housing swarmed into Boise. Short time later, 1951, Boise, a town of 32,000 people, was building one elementary school per year for a 10-year period to house the baby boom. The people born from 1946 on that are considered baby boomers from 46 to 63 have just started turning 78 this year, 75, and you're going to be able to see in the coming years a boom in the demand for senior living quarters that we've never seen in this country before, following what is now a lull in the number of people that are eligible or needing that type of care. So if we have a shortage of senior housing now, wait 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, in as Boise that had 30,000 people building one elementary school per year, going to be able to keep up with the demand for building senior care facilities and caring for that vulnerable part of the community. It would have been irresponsible in 1948 for Boise to convert a school into housing to meet the short-term housing demand. It's just as irresponsible, or even more so, to convert a care facility for seniors at this point in time into housing for the general population when the demand is going to be in that vulnerable senior level of care needed. Also, as the seniors in the baby boom generation enter the care facilities, they will be leaving their single family homes or their apartments or wherever they're residing now, leaving a vacancy rate in that type of housing in an extremely high demand. So it's irresponsible, short-sighted, and doesn't show any understanding of history if we allow a senior facility to be converted into normal apartments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes,
I
you've
have
got a question.
I have a question for you, sir. I'm going to tying it a little bit, everything you've told us about the history to one of the things we're thinking about here today. Our comprehensive plan which is kind of the overarching policy document that then informs the rules we're supposed to apply.
Yes.
Includes statements like it is a goal to ensure an adequate supply of safe sanitary housing at costs appropriate to the varied financial capabilities of city residents. If this council were to take the position that destroying or demolishing any assisted living facility, given these population trends you're talking about, would violate that part of the comprehensive plan, assuring safe, adequate housing for everybody at various ages and financial conditions. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, because as the people move into that need for senior care facilities, their options for other avenues for finding housing are diminishing right at the time where their need for additional care in a very limiting housing market is occurring.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So those are the only names of folks that signed on the dotted line. Are there others that are here to testify this evening? No. How about online? If you're up, I see a raised hand. Yeah, if you're online to testify on this topic, go ahead and raise your hands and then we'll do a party of record check.
Madam Mayor, this is Michelle Whipple.
I've got to see, this isn't alphabetized, so I have to read through them all. Sorry. Rizzle,
Whipple, she's a party of record.
Ripple. Okay, so you've got a list of party of record. Is it alphabetized? I'll have you do this if you're faster at this than me. Oh, Whipple, Michelle Whipple. Sorry, I was looking for a different last name. Okay, go ahead, Michelle. Welcome.
Can you hear me? Sorry about that.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so I am Michelle Whipple. I reside in 1907 Gold Dust Road, Cascade, Idaho. My mother is a resident and is disabled. She asked me to speak on her behalf as her disability prevents her from doing so. She is a 74-year-old beautiful woman, Boise native, who thought she had found her forever home with Arbor Village. She has met some wonderful people, made wonderful friends, and her disability would not literally allow her to make a move. Many of these people are severely disabled. I don't think anybody takes into consideration how much of an impact there is for people to pack up their things, label their things, move their things. And so on her behalf, she wanted it mentioned that making such a move would be exhaustive and take a toll on her health. As my own self, Michelle Whipple, I would like to make a comment now, if that's all right.
Sorry, Michelle. Yes, just keep talking. You've got 3 minutes to say it all, so you can continue.
Thank you. The developer, having 10 years experience in developing, being proud of that fact, I'm dismayed. I've been in healthcare for over 30 plus years. And when you buy a building filled with people, you care about the people and not about a vacant building. This guy just doesn't get it. The bus does not help Medicaid patients help find a new place to live. How crazy is this? They are taking new residents every day currently through that building, taking their deposits up until the time that they close the doors. Is that a credible and acceptable way for a California company to do business in Boise? I don't think so. These people are former judges. They are people that are veterans. They are people that are Boise natives. And Denopoly cares only about money. They look forward to shutting the doors as soon as possible at any expense. They do not care about the people, and shame on them. And I am very hopeful as a Boise native myself that the city council will deny their Denopolis appeal and see in favor of these beautiful residents of Arbor Village. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Hey, Michelle, this is Council Member Jimmy Halliburton. I don't know if you can see me or
Yes,
not.
sir.
Do you know if you or your mom signed on to the group letter that was sent to council recently?
My mother did.
Your mother did. So in the letter, thank you. In the letter, it refers to some specific asks that are a little bit different, different than what was proposed by planning and zoning. Specifically, it says a notice of 3 months moving expenses and $10,000. I'm wondering if you know how the $10,000 was arrived upon as far as the reimbursement for the resident for the deposit.
I don't. I may be speaking out of turn in saying that she was letter of record as being on, wanting to speak, but I'm not sure that, Jimmy, that I'm answering you correctly. So pardon me. I'm not sure.
Sorry,
And I don't know about that figure at all.
That's fine. I just was curious if you knew. I appreciate you testifying.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Michelle. Next up, we've got Katie Fight and then Sarah Rosen. Katie, you there? We can't hear you.
Hello?
Oh, yep. Now we can hear you.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I would just ask you to do the very best you can to support these residents, and to really, really, really do everything you can to ensure that they have quality care. Here they are at the end of their lives, and that the developer, when he talks about what a tough time it is in the elder care world, some of the statements just to me seem outrageous about how much the costs have increased, and that's why they're doing this. And I'm wondering, were any supporting documents submitted with his testimony, with the developers, the company that owns this facility, with their appeal that would support some of the statements made here tonight. And I guess I have a concern after listening to all the cost about what a tough time it is for the owner of this property. I'm just wondering if after you approve whatever decision you take here, if they'll just turn around and flip the property and maybe demolish the building and put something else there. I mean, properties flip all the time, and I've seen project after project end up not, going the way that the initial proposal laid in front of City Council was supposed to go. So anyway, I apologize. I'm a little incoherent. I just got back from a long, long drive. And so excuse my sort of stuttered testimony, but please do all you can for these residents.
Thanks, Katie. And welcome back. We've got Sarah Rosen next.
Hi, hello, Madam Mayor, Council. May I share my screen?
Is that allowed? Yeah. Yes, it sounds like we can make that possible.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Rosen, and I live at 1209 South Philippi Street in Boise.
Sarah, Sarah, so you know, we no longer see the website. I think you were sharing. We see your notes for your
There
testimony.
we go.
There
Thank
you
you.
go. Thanks.
I would like to keep that up. There. I'll pull that up when I'm ready for that.
Sure.
I typically have two monitors, so I'm a little confused there. Sorry, I live at 1209 South Philippi Street, and I attended the hearing on February 13th. And I intended to be in person today to speak, but unfortunately I couldn't make it due to a scheduling conflict with work. Regardless, I want to strongly respond to the appellant's memorandum submitted on February 23rd. First off, I want to draw attention to the fact that DiNapoli, to look at what it is for what it is. It's a private capital investment group that specializes from time to time in housing for the elderly. I think it's prudent to consider DiNapoli as a whole and take into account what's on the table for them as a private investment group. As listed on the current DiNapoli website, which I showed earlier and I'll show again, as of today, May 2nd, their portfolio includes 7 senior housing units, including Arbor Village, 10 hotels, and 22 multifamily properties. The appellant claims that they have been coming out of pocket for Arbor Village, which may be true. However, the value of the entire portfolio owned by the LLC totals well over $1 billion and has multiple avenues for dealing with and negating their marginal loss here in Boise. We should also keep in mind that of the total 39 properties in this portfolio, 7 of them are homes to vulnerable people. This is not a one-off business opportunity for DiNapoli. They didn't just stumble into this and then a pandemic happened. This is the lane that they continually choose to play in, and thus they must play by the rules, which are actual laws that distinctly protect elderly citizens. So my question is, how is it not feasible for this real estate investment firm to uphold the very reasonable conditions from the city and still remain loyal to their obligations to their shareholders? The 2 managing partners have over 50 years of experience between them. And we heard from Mr. Seaman himself that he has over a decade of experience. So surely they could figure something out or move some funds around. That's their job. And yet here we are again, all gathered, listening to this California-based investment firm attempt to fight their way out of their business responsibilities in order to recoup the losses from their poor investment decisions. My statements here are not solely based on the emotional and empathy-stoking element of this particular dispute. Of course, as a human being, I cannot ever condone the commodification of vulnerable people, which unfortunately is not one of DiNapoli's operational values. However, as a person who also works in e-commerce and marketing and is also a startup founder, my statements are based on business as well. It's my strong opinion that DiNapoli is not acting in a responsible way that benefits my community or Boise at large when it comes to business. With the closure of Arbor Village, a staff of over a dozen people will lose their jobs and more than 90 residents will be displaced, likely requiring city, state, and federal assistance. This is not a good deal for Boise business or Boise residents, plain and simple. This is a good deal for DiNapoli. And now that they are not getting exactly what they want, they are playing by the all too common business game called, as long as the rules benefit me, I'll play by them, but once they don't, I quit. DiNapoli doesn't want to sell the property, in which case their lease contract with residents might stand. The reality of the situation is that the property, including the 90 human beings who live there, is no longer profitable to the degree that they believe it could be.
Sarah,
Yes.
you've gone over time. So
Okay.
I would just note that all of us got a glimpse of the website when
Okay.
you put it up there the first time. I appreciate that.
If just one more thing, they have done this before. They have sold 3 other senior living properties.
Sarah,
Yes.
because we're in appeal, I've got to cut you off there. I appreciate it. I tend to let people have one extra sentence-ish and gave you that before I flagged you. It's harder because
Thank you.
you're not
Thank you.
here
I
in person
appreciate
to
it.
see it. But
No.
thanks, Sarah. I believe that there's nobody else online. Okay, there's nobody else online. Just want to, before we begin rebuttal, check in. Okay, we're going to go ahead and hear rebuttal. It's the applicant first. Come on up.
How much time do I get?
I think it's 5 minutes. Yep.
Okay. I mean, couple things. I think there's a lot of inaccurate information that we're hearing, and it's clear that there are a lot of intricacies as business and industry, and our community in particular, that are being misrepresented and just people don't understand. I don't have time to respond to everything, but I do want to respond to a couple of things specifically. First, all of our residents get the same exact treatment and amenities, regardless if they're Medicaid or not. And second, we have not done this before. Yes, we own other senior housing communities. We have never tried to convert one before. We've never tried to remove residents before. This is new. We're in an unprecedented situation. And despite pulling up our website and trying to point out what we do, this is not limited to us. Over 15 communities in Boise have closed. And those are local owners and out-of-state owners. So this is a problem that goes beyond us. And I think a lot of the problem specifically is with Medicaid. There's a reason there's a shortage of Medicaid beds. It's a public policy issue. And these complaints should be directed towards federal politicians. We can't control the policy. We can't control the reimbursement, but we're being asked to bear that responsibility. Nobody can force anybody to take Medicaid residents. And we're seeing multiple senior communities, especially in Boise, start moving Medicaid residents out. And that's not us. That's other buildings that are saying we can't afford to do this. And anybody watching this who owns a senior community is now thinking the same thing. I'm never going to admit another Medicaid resident, because not only do I lose money, but it's an incredible political challenge and a public challenge. I realize no matter what I say, I'm the bad guy, and nothing I can do will change people's mind. We've been in this process for over a year. We've been trying to find a workable solution. Unfortunately, it's not a binary decision. I don't think we can force us to continue to operate this and continue to house Medicaid residents, just like you can't force any other owner in Boise to take Medicaid residents. We've tried to find a workable solution. We tried to propose something today we think was fair. It's beyond what is required. And we hope that's acceptable. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Question for you. I'm going to tip my hat a little bit here. So I've got a planning and zoning commission that we trust to make really good decisions, who we've been told by our staff who has expertise in this field, that took all public testimony into account, that they went through the conditions on for the requirements and cited some stuff, I think, in the fifth area as far as references in the comprehensive plan. I'm going to ask about that later. And then they came up with conditions put forward that were referenced to the Uniform Relocation Act. So to me, that's not arbitrary. They found a way to do it. So there's not a lot showing me at this point that they've made error in their decision. So here's my question to you. You've got a business that how much a month are you losing?
About $100,000.
About $100,000 a month. Okay. So you've got a business living at about $100,000 a month. How many residents?
Right now, 89.
89 residents. And you've got conditions that were put forward by planning and zoning that could add up, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got a letter that's written by the folks who are staying here asking for something less. They're asking for 3 months instead of a year. They're asking for $10,000 per resident. If it was me, I would be doing the math in my head and trying to figure out how much is one of these going to cost versus the other. And that would be affecting my decision on whether or not I would be going into mediation. And so I guess, what I'm trying to figure out here is when they've got a request for mediation, they've got a different offer on the table. To me, their offer looks better than what planning and zoning put forward. Are you looking at that the same way, or am I wrong in looking at that as far as $10,000 in 3 months and some relocation assistance?
I mean, is $10,000 better than 3 years? Certainly. But I think we're
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're at the point where we know what we can do. We know what we can't do. We're in a situation that's, it's challenging, and it's to continue operations is untenable. And we tried to come up with something that was fair. And again, I know it's not going to be enough, and I know it's not going to make everyone happy, but the reality of the situation is that's what we can do. And that's why we proposed it.
And Madam Mayor, so just the final follow-up question here. So it sounds to me like you're saying that you're not willing to go to mediation, or if we went to mediation, that you're not willing to negotiate on the conditions.
I'm a bit confused because it sounds like there's questions about who they actually represent. And with someone whose goal is to keep the community open, is it just a stall tactic? How long does this last? I mean, we're in a position.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. So if we directed council to go to mediation to negotiate conditions on what the conditions would be in place for this to get approved. Would that be mediation that you would be willing to go to?
I mean, I'd say I'm a little unprepared for this, but I'll probably revert back to what I said. We've come up to what we think are pretty fair conditions, and anything that strays from that dramatically is, we'd rather just pull our application and move on.
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Mhm.
I'm going to twist your arm on mediation a little bit.
Sure.
One thing that you don't have is finality. This council could vote to deny both appeals, leave the Planning and Zoning Commission, ruling stand. It could adopt your amended conditions, but one of these people is going to take you to court, and the court could reverse and undo it all. So you don't have finality. You'll get that out of a mediation. Second, there's been some interest in the questions from this council on preserving assisted living facility inventory. And if that's true, and if that's where the weight of the council votes are, you may not get this approved even if you turn it into an empty building, because we'll want to preserve that inventory. So you're not facing a situation where you know where your bottom line is and you've made your best offer, because you have the risk that everything could change in court, and you have the risk that your only option is to run an assisted living facility there or let the building fall down. You can take all that off the table by neutralizing each other's rights to go to court and by neutralizing each other's rights to appeal. So I don't think you're at your true bottom line, because you still face all these risks that you, if you're rational, ought to be willing to give something to ameliorate. Does that change your view on mediation at all?
It does change my view, but I think I'd go back and question, and we're seeing multiple other owners do this in Boise.
Well, just like I'm not interested in the fact that you're from California or the fact that you've been disparaged, I'm not interested in what other owners are doing. I want to talk about this application here, what's reasonable and rational for you, and what's reasonable and rational for the opposing party in this appeal. It makes sense to me that a fiscally prudent operator of a business would want to take that delay and time risk off the table, would want to take off the table the risk that we reach a decision here that's very favorable to you, and then a sympathetic judge who is the same age as the patients in this facility unravels it all. You could get rid of all of that. Does that change any of your perspective on what mediation is?
I think there's a lot to think about, and yes, it does change my perspective. And yes, you're bringing up some points that I think we need to consider. I'd probably want to just talk to our attorney and understand what the pluses and minuses and what mediation actually looks like.
Do you need 3 minutes? This is not my meeting, but yeah.
Yeah, and there's a cost incurred to the city for mediation, so it's got to be legitimate willingness to mediate, not a we'll walk into mediation, but put the offer that you propose to council on the table, and that's it. So the question is, I'll go back to Council President Pro Tem and Councilmember Bajent, whether or not you're willing to intentionally and authentically enter into a mediation to discuss this.
If we say
I'd actually like just a yes or no at this point, because we've gotten lots
Can I have a conversation with our attorney, and can you give us a couple minutes?
Sure. Why don't we'll take 5. You can do that. And then of course I still want to hear rebuttal from the appellant as well, but let's take 5
Madam
now.
Mayor,
Yes.
could I ask a question if we're not going to hear from him again?
No, we're going to hear from him again.
Okay.
Yeah. Ask that the applicant, who I think is probably in the lobby and should be able to hear me, come on back in. We have 2 more. Yeah. One deferred. Yeah. Go ahead.
Ready? So I guess I'd ask back, what particular conditions were you interested in mediating, and what happens if mediation fails?
Madam Mayor, I don't speak for only me. I think that the view in light of the last hearing was that there's likely to be an approval, but there's also likely to be conditions that you say you can't contend with.
Mm-hmm.
So I would expect it would be relocation conditions, but I don't know. we're not there yet. I mean, the way it would come up would be at the end of everything, someone would make a motion to direct you guys to mediation, and the motion would say what they want to mediate. And it would be discussed and voted on. I think that's how it would go.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I can add just maybe a little bit more to that. I mean, we've got a letter from the folks that are living there, and they're afraid of what the next steps are. They're afraid of there not being enough staff there to actually serve the needs. They're afraid of what their future is going to look like. And they're mentioning that they're willing to compromise in the letter. And the compromises look to me better than what's on the table right now. With 3 months, moving expenses, and $10,000 to reimburse each resident for the deposit paid at Arbor Village and to cover the cost of a new facility. I'm not saying that that's going to be the exact amount, but what I'm reading looks like a better deal than what planning and zoning offered. So I think that there's probably space between those areas to be negotiated. And it's a group of folks who I think they want some direction on what's going to happen that isn't vague. And in my personal opinion, the conditions that you put forward were very vague, and I could not figure out exactly what was going to happen. And I think people just want to know.
I'm happy to address those.
And so I think that that's where mediation can take place, is that you've got a group of folks willing to compromise on a deal that to me looks better than what planning and zoning does. And you've got conditions that you've put forward as well. And I think within there's room to figure something out. And to the question of like, what will happen if you don't reach a decision, then I don't know what the answer to that is.
The council will make the decision.
Yep. All right.
I think if there's any expectation of a lump sum payment to residents outside of that one relocation expense, that's something that we're not willing to do or can't do. And if that's what's going to be expected, we would just withdraw application at that point.
Right.
Is there an opportunity to make the mediation time certain? Like this gets done in 90 days so that there's not any further delays? Is that an opportunity that we would have?
There is, if there's a mediator that's
Can do it.
available and secured.
Okay.
I'll have you go ahead and finish your rebuttal.
I covered what I wanted to say.
Okay, great. Thanks.
If I may speak, Amanda Schaus, 251 East Front Street, Elam and Burke, representing the applicant. Just Madam Mayor, council members, just another concern with the mediation that we have is the practical aspect of the time, which we just discussed. And also the issue that Councilmember Bajent brought up, which is who are we negotiating with? There's a letter from some residents. Do we have to come to an agreement with all of the residents? There's just a practical application of that that's just really difficult in the situation. If we get half of the residents to agree, how do we address the other half? So
appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, now we'll have the appellant.
Madam Mayor, council members, Council President Woodings, and Council Pro Tem. I want to correct statements that I made earlier that were inaccurate. One was that IFHC submitted a mediation request that was denied. In fact, it wasn't denied. We just, besides hearing that it was received, did not hear anything back.
It's the one you sent today. Okay.
Yesterday, the prior one, right. And then also that when we sent those mediation requests, we thought appellants or applicants would receive them and did not know that they wouldn't. And so we're very sorry that that came as such a surprise to them. We just thought that was part of the process. And so those are the two things that I wanted to correct for the record. IFHC, with regard to our appeal, IFHC strongly believes that the community is stronger for having this facility and that we would continue to zealously advocate for keeping the facility a working assisted living facility here in the community of Boise, Idaho. right? And we also see that it's possible that that part of that it's a disservice to the entire community to allow an investment group to come in and when their plan failed, to let the rest of the community pick up the slack of the people that they were supposed to be serving when that happens. With regard to mediation, IFHC has many times in the past helped with mediations for other communities within the city of Boise. And we've never put our personal interest before our company's interest before the interest of those particular individuals. And we will continue to work that way. We will zealously advocate for their needs. We can reach out to those people and see if they would like to organize together and be a single entity, receiving a single deal together. Obviously, we can't force them to do that, but we can reach out and see what interest there is in such a thing as that. And that's all I have to say at this time.
All right.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Monica, just for clarity, Intermountain Fair Housing Council represents how many of the tenants?
We have four. We have four bona fide residents.
And so and I appreciated that you brought up, that you brought up mediation as a possibility. But can you speak to the practicalities of being able to accomplish that when in your prior statements, you mentioned what you might or your four residents may be asking, which seems very different from the ask that we received from the residents, which was quite a long list. I don't know what percentage it represents of the full tenants there, but it was a decent number that signed on to that letter.
Do you want to speak to the difference?
Yeah, there was a family member of a resident who is one of our clients who of her own volition went to the facility on Friday and held a meeting with residents, and during that process asked them what they wanted from this process and basically transcribed that letter for them. So we were knowledgeable of it, but we weren't a part of that. But just because she did it of her own volition, that's how it came about. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. And can I just add one more thing to what Monica said, which is when we originally submitted our request for mediation, it was really about to explore other ways to keep the facility open and find possible other ways to fund the Medicaid beds and or find a different purchaser. I don't know if the housing authority, if there's federal Medicaid funds. And I just want to put that out there because I know we're talking strictly about mediation for the conditions, and that wasn't necessarily our intent, but obviously this body can decide to do whatever they want to do.
Thanks. All right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing.
Questions for staff?
Yeah, I figured we'd do them once I'd closed.
Sounds good.
Okay. And now, questions for staff?
I want to go first. I'll go first. So I'll follow up on a question that I asked earlier, and I think I asked it incorrectly. Going through the minutes, I think what Commissioner Blanchard was referring to was some different parts of the comprehensive plan. But I'm wondering if you were able to find some specific parts of the comprehensive plan that the rest of the commissioners were referring to as far as not meeting condition number 5.
Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, I think the reference that you're speaking to, as I understand it, is that which speaks to the community's commitment to people that are in vulnerable housing
Correct.
conditions, and I'll reference this is in section 2, chapter 2 of the comprehensive plan, the last section of that chapter, which is entitled Support a Range of Services for Families and Persons in Need. And it has a number of different goals and objectives in that section, but I'll just reference one sentence. I won't read the whole thing, but Boise recognizes the need to protect the health and quality of life of its residents, including its most vulnerable populations. And then it gets into goals that speak to that specific outcome that the community was seeking.
Perfect. That's helpful. And then I've got, I think, just one other question here. And I just have some unclarity. And so maybe if you can help with that. I don't know that we have the ability to require this to stay or remain as a assisted living facility if that's not the will of the owner. But that kind of keeps getting talked about. And I guess I don't know if that's something that we actually have the ability to do.
That is certainly not what's before you tonight, is a question of whether this will stay a assisted living center or not. A zoning application, which is what we're discussing tonight and what we receive from the applicant, is not the means to determine what the ultimate use of this I mean, it's certainly the venue to discuss the request by the applicant, which is seeking to redevelop the property into apartments. But that, regardless of what that determination is by council relative to this application, that doesn't necessarily mean that this would be assisted living in the future. I mean, that's not the question. The question before us is, do we think his application meets the terms of the zoning ordinance?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask that in just a different way because I know what you're saying and I 100% agree. If we rejected the rezone, that still wouldn't make it maintain an assisted living facility.
That action in and of itself would not protect the assisted living or the residents that live there.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Yes. Director Keene, I have a question in terms of the timeline given to residents. One of the things we obviously look at was P&Z, arbitrary and capricious. Can you talk to us about how that year mark came about and their deliberation on that? Because it is different than the other marker in the federal law that they're using as a guideline.
Right. Mayor, Councilmember Willits, there was a lot of discussion and frankly, a little bit of frustration at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing deliberations on this, because clearly their greatest concern was towards the people that live at this location. And honestly, they were frustrated by a lack in their minds of any kind of specifics from the applicant as to how these people would be assisted. And that runs the whole gamut. That includes not until the very end, any kind of reference to how long they'd be given to move or any kind of support they'd be given to move, any kind of help they'd be provided to find new housing, any kind of financial assistance they'd be given. So since none of that was offered, even though that transition plan was foremost on their mind, they were searching for how do we enact conditions that address those issues that we're most concerned about and that we feel are relevant to the comprehensive plan. So they went to the Uniform Relocation Act and decided upon those conditions that the three that we now are discussing. And the 1 year does exceed what the federal requirement is. So there is a variance there. So yeah, that's a good point, Council Member, with regard to that one.
Madam Mayor. Director Keene, what are some allowable uses for the property, should it be redeveloped, that would not require a conditional use permit?
It would be other forms of residential. So it would be single family or townhouses, this kind of thing. What kicks this into a plan unit development or conditional use permit, and I use those together because a plan unit development is a type of conditional use permit. But what kicks them to the conditional use permit is the apartments that are being proposed. That does require the conditional use and the plan unit development in the R2 district currently. So they could do other forms of residential like townhouses or single family, fairly dense. I think it's 14 or so units per acre that are permitted, but they can't do the apartments without the plan unit development.
Madam Mayor. Tim, just to follow up on the prior question, I appreciated that Planning and Zoning looked at the Uniform Relocation Act, but I am curious about the requirement for the period of 3 years. And that is also not something that I've seen within that act. So I'm just curious as to what was the rationale for Planning and Zoning in coming up with that period of time?
Well, my understanding is that that was directly from the Uniform Relocation Act, the requirement that that in cases where the Relocation Act is relevant, that those that are moving, the people that are living there are required to help them with that housing. And in cases where the housing where they end up is more expensive than the rent that they're currently paying, that they pay that additional amount for 3 years. My understanding was that was part of the Uniform Relocation Act, with the one important addition that it's either that or you pay a lump sum to each individual, which was part of the condition, and you see that before you tonight. But the 3 years was directly from the Uniform Relocation Act.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry to ask, but do you have a specific, I couldn't find that specifically for the 3 years, and also whether there was a caps associated with that. I think we've heard that in prior testimony about, does that mean I can go and live in the most luxury place possible and you have to pay for that? I tried to find that in advance. I just couldn't find it.
And I can look for that, council member. It's a, as you know, a significant document to go through. But my understanding was that the lump sum requirement that's included as an option in that act doesn't include an amount, that is associated with that. So it's not to be negotiated between the tenant and the landlord, but is set forth in that act based on the size of the unit. So there's a specific amount in the Relocation Act that speaks to that. And I can help by going through that and getting the specific references if council desires.
I'd propose that would be appropriate to come back with findings rather than holding this evening for that. And that this is probably something that's ought to be determined by council if you believe there ought to be a cap or a finite, a shorter period of time that would be covered. And then you could direct staff to return with additional backup materials for findings that you take a look at our next meeting.
Madam Mayor, I have another question for the director. Do these conditions become a precedent? In other words, anyone else who wants to do this is what is required because we did it once before?
Well, this is an important decision. I think it would affect any case, certainly the discussions around any case like this, where we've got people that need help that are facing displacement. You all know we've had this discussion as part of the new zoning code and requiring a conditional use permit, not only in cases where where you've got assisted living, but also nursing homes, mobile home parks, even naturally occurring affordable housing for people making 60% or less of area median income. This interest in cases where we're seeing that redevelopment, that the people that are living there are taken care of. So I think this is an important decision around, what are the expectations that relate to how we expect people in this circumstance to be assisted by redevelopment, or those that are seeking redevelopment or rezoning or zoning approval to do other things.
Thanks. I'd say now, before additional deliberations, a motion would be most appropriate. Then deliberation can occur. And then other motions can occur if necessary, but let's get something on the table.
Madam Mayor, I'm not prepared to make a motion on mediation. I am prepared to make a motion on the appeals. So if somebody wants to make a motion on mediation, now's the time. Okay. I'm going to do them one at a time. I move to deny the appeal by IFHC because I don't think it raises legal arguments that show that.
Wait. Don't give your argument. Don't give your reasons yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
It's getting late. I apologize. I move to deny the appeal by IFHC.
Second.
Now you may. I want to check the order of this. We take them each one at a time. Okay. All right.
I don't think it makes legal arguments that that showed the Planning and Zoning Commission violated the law, the process, or the Idaho code. And I think that the factual conclusions that it made were deliberated over hard. You can tell everybody took it really seriously. Giant policy questions here, but I don't find the error or abuse of discretion or arbitrary and capricious standards met by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Further discussion? All right. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Nash, Willetts,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Burton.
Yes.
5 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
And then on the applicant's appeal, I guess the technical wording would be to deny the appeal, but issue revised conditions. And my revised conditions are really zooming in on just the 3 that were appealed. Number 1, no revision. The applicants will give the tenants 1 year to find suitable comparable housing. Number 2, upon identification of new housing for each existing tenant, the applicant will pay for relocation expenses consistent with the cost schedule of the Uniform Relocation Act, so no change. Number 3, a change to number 3, the applicant shall be responsible for the difference in monthly rent if the new household rent is higher than the current household paid rent for a period of 3 years. But I would strike the second sentence about a lump sum payment. I don't understand why that would have a basis. And then I would add that the applicant shall hire a third-party specialist to assist with transportation and moving, and that person shall be a Medicaid specialist. I would add that no construction shall begin until 100% of the residents have been relocated. And I would add that the applicant shall not accept new tenants while it's in the process of evicting the old ones.
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion.
Madam Mayor, the comprehensive plan directs us to consider a whole lot of things in its intention, but one of the elements of the comprehensive plan is our city's desire as planners to care for, or at least provide housing and meet the basic needs of vulnerable populations, including this one. So the Planning and Zoning Commission was correct to consider that in the CUP analysis, as we discussed at the beginning. These factors that I've listed are designed to mitigate the harm to those particular damaging elements to that vulnerable population. We heard a lot of testimony about how Medicaid is complex and about whether the bus can carry people back and forth and Medicaid reimbursement and all that. If there's a third party involved, I think it's reasonable and supported that that person have expertise in Medicaid. I don't think it makes any sense to begin this process until we have provided shelter and resources for each of the people who are currently living there. And so that's why the condition that you can't start work until everybody has been moved out. And the same with accepting new tenants in the interim. The comprehensive plan goal here is to take care of this group of people who are vulnerable. We can't be swapping them in, collecting rent for a few months, and then kicking them out. That's the opposite of what the comprehensive plan wants. So that's the record support that I find for each of those conditions.
I'd ask that you, just as part of your motion, I know there's still discussion to be had, that you direct staff to return with findings.
Please, thank you. Yes, so included in the motion, which I hope the seconder will concur, is that staff comes back with these findings on a sheet of paper so that we can all look at them and make sure we're clear.
Seconder concurs.
Madam Mayor, can I ask a question about the findings? So let's say we find out that the Uniform Housing Act, or it doesn't have a 3-year ruling. So then, I mean, what do we do if it's not aligned with the federal law?
Well, the findings will be findings in support of the motion that Councilmember Bajent made. And he is referencing, I think my understanding is that in your motion, you've left 3 years. Is it contingent on Uniform Relocation Act, or is it 3 years?
Madam Mayor, it's 3 years. I'm not importing the federal standard into our code, and I'm not relying on it, but it is a guideline that, based on the facts here, meets our need. I'm certainly not following federal law in the sense that it controls us, but we have a risk to address or a harm to address, and it happens to coincide with what this federal guideline document says.
Madam Mayor, I think I have some confusion here. I'm trying to figure out what we're talking about with 3 years. I think it's 3 months or 1 year. I think that the motion was 1 year and that the act is 3 months. Am I wrong in that?
Madam Mayor, the motion was 1 year to find suitable and comparable housing. The applicant will pay relocation expenses, and then for a period of 3 years, will make up a rent difference.
Great. I thought you were talking about the first. Yep.
And then a couple of other conditions, but.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I just have a couple of comments as we're deliberating here. And one of those really revolves around the state's responsibility to reimburse Medicaid in a way that takes care of people. It seems like there's a failure to do so. And so now, like my stepmom was on Medicaid in a memory care facility. And we paid a whole bunch of money up front. She was able to live out the rest of her life there. But here we have an issue where people aren't able to do that. And that's just kind of like been the way that these facilities work for a number of years. And I understand that perhaps there's not the legal mechanisms in these leases to make that a reality. And maybe that's part of the problem as well. But I really think that the root of the problem is that we're not reimbursing Medicaid sufficiently to take care of people when they need assisted living. So I just wanted to make that point. I really think it puts us in a bad position. It puts families in an untenable position. It puts property owners in a frankly bad position because they're not able to run a business in a way that's solvent. And that's not good either. So we really have been put in this position because of that lack of responsibility and lack of accountability by our state to do their job and take care of people.
Madam Mayor, I have to say I'm really struggling this evening because I think it's incredibly important that we take care of this population. The reason why I'm struggling, and I'm struggling with the motion, is because I loved the term that was used about the forever home, and it strikes me as troublesome that we have that concept, but we enter into month-to-month leases. So I am struggling here because I worry with the motion that those conditions are even greater than what the Planning and Zoning Commission approved, and that this will lend more credence for the owner to just simply close this facility and make this vulnerable population even more vulnerable. And so I am just really struggling with this motion and this dynamic because we entered into month-to-month leases, 30 days notice is all that's required. And they could do that and close this facility and will not have any of the abilities and to support this population to at least find some compromise here. And that's where I'm really struggling this evening because I'm afraid that that is what will end up happening.
Madam Mayor, I have the exact same concern. The only stick is that if they do that, they lose the redevelopment right. They can't do the PUD. They can close the doors and sell it to somebody else. They can do a whole bunch of cold and heartless things, disgusting things. I don't know what we can do about that. They have the property right. We can condition it more heavily. We can condition it less heavily. I get the capitalism, financial business point of view that they have, and in a sense, it's fair. It's not human, but it's the rules we play by. But I'd rather be in a precarious position, doing what we can within the scope of how we interpret the comprehensive code to take care of people, than construing the code to harm them. And so I guess I'm going to take, my feeling is to take the risk that they really do want this PUD and that they really will live up to the representations that they're trying to help people in this community and can't make it work financially, and that they'll figure out how to get there. I hear you loud and clear. I just don't know what to do either.
Madam Mayor, I'm going to be voting to support the motion, and here's why. I had really hoped that we could go to mediation. I thought that was going to be our winning route for everyone for this, and I ran into two major issues. One, I didn't feel like the applicant was really willing to negotiate in that mediation. Two, the mediation that was being proposed didn't seem like it actually had a great representative, and it seemed like when the mediation was proposed, it was actually proposed for something else. It was proposed to actually shut down the application and not actually put those conditions in place. So we were basically sending two people to mediation that weren't in any sort of agreement to start with. So that didn't feel like it was a route forward. And then really, looking at what we're charged to do in this particular situation, it's to see if planning and zoning made an error. And going through the testimony tonight, listening to folks, talking with the applicants, looking through the minutes and the transcripts, I really wasn't able to see anything that looked like a clear error that they put forward. And everything that they referred to that maybe was interpreted as arbitrary or capricious, they gave a specific spot where they found that, and that was the Uniform Relocation Act. So they had something to point to that said, hey, we're not just making these numbers up, we're actually pointing to another document that exists. This document doesn't say that we have to do this, but it provides some guidelines. And so one, I think that this is the right thing to do. I hope that it happens this way. I don't know for sure that it is, but I think that my decision and my interpretation of our decision is we're trying to figure out if planning and zoning made an error in this. I don't think that there was anything that was talked about tonight that would show that they did. I would remind everybody that this started out with an applicant that we said didn't give a proper notice structure that was reasonable to its tenants. And we fixed that. We're going to make sure that that's changed in our zoning code going forward, that we actually make progress in this area. That's a really good thing. That should have been done to begin with. Not because it was written in code, but because it was the right thing to do. And then we asked for, requested a transition plan, and there really wasn't a specific transition plan that was presented to planning and zoning. And so planning and zoning had to up here make a decision. There was an opportunity before the application even came to the table to do the right thing. There was a second opportunity to come with a realistic transition plan that wasn't vague. None of those things happened. And then planning and zoning did the best they could. They made a decision that was based off of city code, our comprehensive plan, and they referenced the Uniform Relocation Act as a guideline. So I don't see that there's any error that they made. And so while I do have those same concerns, that's kind of where I'm grounding myself in this decision.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. And I just want to add, the added conditions are really, I think, pretty reasonable and even proposed by the applicant. Adding a relocation specialist who's third party, that was proposed by the applicant. And I think that one of the things that we've heard is that this facility is still accepting new tenants, and that is troublesome to me. Going through a process where you are changing use so substantially of a building and still accepting people with, it doesn't seem like a lot of transparency about your future plans is really troubling. And so that added condition about not accepting new tenants, I think is very appropriate. And I think that planning and zoning did their absolute best on the conditions that they provided. So I'm happy to support the motion. And I think it strikes the right balance for protecting the current tenants and still allowing the property to be redeveloped.
Madam Mayor, just to comment on this, I would like a little more finality than I think what the motion offers. My concern is that we're going to approve this and it's going to result in more litigation. And I don't have a guarantee that our conditions are actually going to hold up. I would say my biggest frustration in this is the lack of tools that I feel like I have to preserve assisted living inventory in the state. And just to put staff and council on notice, I hope we have more tools available to us when we revisit the zoning code, hopefully next month. So that would be my ask. I would be more inclined to outright reject the conditional use permit altogether than to do anything. But I don't think I have support for that. So it's not a more motion I'm going to make, but that's a motion I would vote for. And I would like, once again, just to have more tools to be able to protect assisted living inventory. At the same time, I'm not convinced that what we do tonight with this motion is going to have the finality that we want. I think I would make a substitute motion to accept the conditions as provided by the developer. The only change that I would make is on that final condition.
I'm sorry, Colin, excuse me, council member.
Yeah.
Our process is a little different.
Okay. All right.
You can't just make a substitute motion. You have to request permission to make a substitute motion, and the council would have to approve that request to make a substitute motion.
Am I allowed to
At
state what
which-
the substitute motion would be?
At which point
Okay.
you could then make a substitute motion.
Okay.
So pretty much, I mean, maybe council will feel differently, but I mean, it's different than the legislative process. I'm sorry.
No problem. Well, I'd request permission to make a substitute motion.
You have to have a second for that.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. There has to be now a vote called for this.
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
No.
Bajent,
No.
Halliburton,
Yes.
4 in favor, 2 opposed, motion carries.
Okay, so now you may make a substitute motion.
My substitute motion would be that we accept the conditions as provided by the developer with the exception that the final condition that include the Medicaid specialist as suggested by Councilmember Bajent.
So just to clarify, you've just made a substitute motion that has the 3 originally included by Planning and Zoning Commission. You're adding the third-party specialist with Medicaid background or specialty. You're taking off the council members' conditions that no new tenants can be accepted and that they don't have to be all relocated before construction happens.
Madam Mayor, I think my difficulty with this is amending such a complicated set of conditions on the fly. I think I'd be more comfortable if we had something come back from staff. So
That's at this point, that's not possible. I mean, we're in the deliberation mode. So what I need from you now is clarification of what your motion was, so that then we can handle your motion and then take up another motion if necessary.
then I'd ask unanimous consent to withdraw my motion. If that's appropriate.
No, wait, let me think about something. Did we had a vote? It's okay. Okay, so no action has been taken on your motion. Yes. Without objection. All right. So now there is no motion on the floor. So we need,
The original
Goes back to the original motion.
because you didn't remove your motion. It's still there. Okay, all right. So unanimous consent, we remove the alternative motion. So we're back to the original motion.
Madam Mayor, I just like to put in my 2 cents here. I think anyone in the audience and anyone watching will see
how frustrating this situation is for everyone up here. Not only are we trying to make really complex policy on the fly, but also trying to help residents and just do the best that we can. My concern with the planning and zoning's decision was I do think it was arbitrary and capricious. I think that they used a federal law as a marker, but not on everything. And so I'm really struggling seeing that thought process through. I'm also concerned that we're setting pseudo policy about what happens in the future based on this. I would prefer that the parties could get together and figure this out. That's not going to happen. I think we all wish that was going to happen. That's always better when there's compromises brought to us, but I think planning and zoning was arbitrary. And I understand why they tried, but at the end of the day, I don't feel comfortable voting for this because I think there's just way too many questions for something this large that's going to have implications far beyond this meeting.
Madam Mayor, your call on running the meeting, but I have a proposal to modify my motion that might bring those to some comfort.
I mean, you're the maker of the motion, but we've had discussion and debate on the original motion, went through. I mean, if you're feeling compelled to change your motion, then, but you don't have to have unanimity up here either.
No, we may get you out of a tie in this situation. So let me propose to the secondary modification. Just addressing the 3 conditions that were at issue in the applicant's appeal. The applicant will give the existing tenants 6 months, not 1 year, prior written notice to vacate the facility. Upon identification of housing for each existing tenant, the applicant will pay relocation expenses consistent with the cost schedule of the Uniform Relocation Act, because it happens to be a good proxy for what this will cost in this case. The applicant shall be responsible for the difference in the monthly rent if the new household rent is higher than the current household paid rent, but only for a period of 3 years. The applicant will hire a third-party relocation assistant who is a Medicaid expert. The applicant will not accept new tenants, and construction will not begin until 100% of the residents at this location have been relocated.
Seconder concurs.
The change being from 1 year to 6 months and really nothing else.
And yeah, just clarifying a few things that were murky for, I think, 2 of the council members.
All right, further discussion? All right, well,
Madam Mayor, I do have one comment.
Yeah.
Okay, so to the maker of the motion, I believe that you're making the motion and you are changing it from 1 year to 6 months, and you're specifically doing that because that's what was proposed by the applicant.
Madam Mayor, that, and because the condition's a little bit inert in that they can't do anything until everybody's moved out. But it shortens the timeline for them to get this work done. And so it provides some of the finality that Councilmember Nash was looking for. And then clarifying that the Uniform Relocation Act is a guide that exists out in the federal world that happens to apply well to the facts here, rather than something we're applying like a law. Hopefully address some of Councilmember Willett's concerns.
Madam Mayor, I had another question. Councilmember Bajent, can you talk a little bit about not removing the condition on number 4?
Madam Mayor, I think we have incredibly ample evidence that that there is not a place for these people to go at exactly the rent that they're paying. They need to go somewhere. Otherwise, we heard testimony, the alternative is quite possibly homelessness. The only way to ameliorate that is to provide some sort of buffer that opens up the range of places they might be able to get into. That buffer in our society is money, and that money gets paid in condition 4.
And Madam Mayor, that we would get a finding on whether that is actually consistent with the Uniform Relocation Act.
And no, because we're not applying the Uniform Relocation Act. That was a reference point from which the Planning and Zoning Commission deliberated on their conditions.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I'm gonna call the question, and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Amy Keith.
Yes.
Nash. Willetts.
Yes.
Whittings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. I didn't want to say anything earlier because I wasn't sure if I was voting. And I figured I'd just ask to explain my vote on this one. First, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank the Planning and Zoning Commission for the work that they did and the deep deliberation that they had. And I hope that the public here in the community sees how seriously this council takes these issues. I would have voted for the first motion with the year runway. And I appreciate that you explain that if you tighten it up with relocation, it'll just get it done. But I would have voted for the first motion. And I appreciate that the Fair Housing Council has asked us to have a policy discussion about more issues than just this specific application. And so while mediation for this application, I also believe it would not have worked with two parties coming at it from such a different place. But the appropriate place for the discussions about how we care for our seniors, how we ensure that there's housing for everyone that's affordable at Boise budgets at all ages. Some of those things that you brought up saying that you wanted us to have a conversation about is better to be had as policymakers as we're looking at our housing strategies and housing policies in this community than in a mediation. And I just say that it's something we do need to look at. I really appreciate Mr. Hutchinson's comments in history on the booms in our own community. I think many of us have experienced or have friends that have experienced trying to find places for their loved ones to live at this age and beyond in their life. And it's a responsibility that falls on all of us. But as we look at just the importance of housing and dignity and care for everyone in our community, this is important that we get this right. As we look at naturally occurring affordable housing in our modern zoning code, it's important that we get that right. And so I do want to continue that conversation because ultimately, like we were talking about, is it going to cost this investor to help their residents find a new home, or is it going to cost the city as we're dealing with those who are unhoused now because this has happened, which is ultimately a cost to the public. And so we've got to figure out as a community how we tackle some of these really big issues that we're doing a lot and making a lot of progress on. But I think that this application in particular pointed out the need for us to have a conversation, a policy conversation, and frankly, a community conversation about how we preserve housing for our seniors that's affordable and how we meet the need that's sure to come in the days and years to come. So thank you. And with that, we have two more topics that I believe we can finish before 10. We're not going to pick up new business after 10.
Before we move on, I need to make a motion that on CBA 22-27, 4355 North Fifeshire, requesting a deferral to a date certain of May 16th, 2023.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that's deferred to May 16th. And now we'll pick up CAR 23-7 on Denton Road. Got Jesse. And then South Beck and Bear, Jay Gibbons. Hello, sir. Is there a neighborhood association present for this one? Online? All right, and anybody here in the public to testify on this? How about online? All right, so one of the things, if you're in agreement with the terms and conditions of staff report, you can also just let us know that. All right, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'll make this quick. Then before you is CAR 23-7, a modification of the development agreement to increase the height of the DA to accommodate elevator overruns and roof access stairs located on Denton Street. This subject property is rezoned C2D DA in 1999 and then modified in 2003 to allow for additional uses and height. In 2021, there was an approved PUD and DA modification to allow for multifamily residential and commercial uses within the single structure. And this also allowed for a height exception up to 63 feet. Currently, the applicant is requesting a modification to that PUD and DA for an additional height exception to accommodate the elevator overruns and roof access staircase. The planning team is supportive of the modification and is minor to the overall development, and the proposed height increase was modified administratively under PUD 23-5 with all other conditions of the original PUD upheld. And in conclusion, the planning team recommends approval, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? All right, sir. I want to let you talk because you sat here for so long waiting to talk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilman, my name is Jay Gibbons. I represent South Beck and Barrett and the owner of this project. My address is 2002 South Vista here in Boise. So first off, I'm gonna say yes, I'm in favor of staff's conclusions, recommendations, and the conditions that basically will be codified into the development agreement. Second time through on this modification because it dates back quite a few years and several other proposed developments that went away, but the DA was modified each time. The reason we're back is because we got ready for building permit, submitted drawings, and staff pointed out that okay, you got a height exception to 63 feet for the height of the building, but they were concerned that our proposed, because we have we have 3 elevators, each of those have to extend above the roof a certain distance in order to have the elevator equipment. And then originally we had roof access for maintenance of AC, mechanical units, what have you, was through a hatch. So it didn't add to the roof height, but we had a change of architects and a conversation with the owner, and we felt it was safer for our future maintenance people to carry their tools and equipment up the stairs to the roof as opposed to crawling up a ladder and through a hatch. And so that increased it further. But I have a graphic that shows the 3 locations. So the west elevator is near the corner of Denton and Cole. The south elevator is, you got the off ramp from the connector to Cole Road. We face up there, there's one there, and there's one in the middle of the roof, the central elevator, that you won't see from the ground anyways. And then the roof tower access is just one. We have several, of course, stair elements, but just the one on Denton goes to the roof itself. So those are basically, we're just asking for allowance to increase the height for those elements. The building doesn't change height. We're sticking to the original 63 feet for the parapet height. It's just the overruns and the stair tower. And this graphic shows, it's a pretty picture. What has never really been discussed before, which you see all the color there. On top of the parapet, the building is set back from the parapet interiorly, and then that is all, there's a clubhouse and recreation space for all the residents that is on, and there's a pool, there's courts, there's a dog run and everything. So that's not germane to the topic at hand per se. I just wanted to show, this graphic shows where those elements extend above the roof height. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions? I like how you pulled it up towards Denton, the building.
Madam Mayor,
yeah.
I don't have a question. I just want to note that this is one of the most fun and colorful renderings of the building that we've ever seen. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing it.
Councilmember, I will pass that along to my architect.
All right. I just want to confirm nobody's here for this. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve CAR -7 or 23-7, 7315 West Denton Road, modification of a DA to allow for a height increase for elevator overruns and roof access stairs.
Second.
We have a motion and second discussion. All right, Claire?
Annie Keith,
Yes.
Nash. Willetts,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
hanging
you.
out with us tonight.
All right, and our final item, CAR 22-46 on Starview Drive. We've got Jesse again, and then David Powell from River Ridge Engineering. Oh, great. All right. And then do we have somebody from Warm Springs Mesa here? Online? All right, so there's no neighborhood association here. Anybody from the public here for this one? Online? All right, you can kind of do the same drill.
All right, good evening. Welcome to our last item, CAR 2246 and SUB 2270. It's a request to rezone approximately 1 acre from A1 to R1C located at 3121 Starview Drive.
Oh, and there's also a sub. Are you doing the sub?
I was
at
about
the
to
same
say
time?
that.
Yeah,
too.
thanks.
2-lot sub is also included. The subject property is currently undeveloped with single-family homes on all sides, and it is located in the Foothills Planning area within the WUI area and approximately 600 feet north of the Warm Springs and Park Center Community Activity Center. The applicant wishes to rezone approximately the 1 acre from A1 to R1C. This property is designated suburban on the future land use map with other R1C zoning across Starview Avenue to the north. The open land district, which is currently zoned, is intended for parkland and low density residential development, while the R1C zone is intended for other residential uses. With the existing R1C across the street, the proposed zone is the most fitting for the area. And while there was some public opposition to the proposed zone due to density concerns, the commission found the R1C zone to be appropriate, especially accompanied with the 2-lot subdivision. These 2 lots would have access from Starview Drive. There are existing curb and gutter improvements along the north side of Starview Drive, but no improvements on the south side of the street. As the Boulder Heights Estates subdivision continues to develop, there will be sidewalk on the north side of Starview Drive connecting to Warm Springs Avenue. A recommended condition of approval at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting was to require the applicant to install curb gutter and detached sidewalk with street trees in that landscape buffer along Starview. Yesterday, ACHG comment was received with recommendations to not install curb and gutter and sidewalk with concerns about drainage. There is planned storm drain system that is not currently installed, and ACHG expressed concerns about the impact of the proposed improvements on neighboring properties prior to the installation of the storm drainage system. And in conclusion, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval of the applications, and I can answer any questions.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. So based on ACHD's feedback, would you recommend that we remove the condition for curb gutter sidewalk? How should we handle that?
Madam Mayor, council members, it is up to your discretion. Usually we do work with ACHD on these type of applications, but being as this comment was so late, we hadn't really had any chance to revise that. Typically, their concerns have to do more with the curb and gutter with drainage rather than sidewalk, because there will be, a lot of paving and impermeable surface on the site already, but the curb and gutter tends to direct stormwater one way or another.
Madam Mayor, follow up. So we could keep the sidewalk and take out the condition for the curb gutter, and that would kind of get to the same thing.
Madam Mayor, council members, that is one option. That's something that I have seen utilized in the past as a compromise to try to get some of that sidewalk in those gaps. I think that the applicant may be able to speak to that as well.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. The storm drainage system, I'm sorry, what is it? Is it something ACHD is installing? Is it something the applicant is installing? Is it part of ACHD's master? I don't know. What is that?
Madam Mayor, council members, so this diagram on the screen shows the approximate sidewalk location that will be installed with this Boulder Heights subdivision build out. With that is a lot of road improvements that do include a storm drainage system.
Got it. So the storm drainage system would go in whenever that sidewalk eventually goes in.
Madam Mayor, council members, that's correct.
Thank you.
I appreciate everybody's had a long evening. Wyatt Johnson, 5549 North Mendelson, Meridian. I'm the owner of the project. And again, I appreciate it's been a long evening. This is an infill project. It's a good infill project because this is an acre that is an obscenely large single lot. And we're dividing it into which will be two very large, very nice lots on the hill. It fits well with the topography. All these surrounding large lots are on slope. This is one last large area that is not on a severe slope. We've done all the geotechnicals, and it really fits the comprehensive plan goal of increasing density without increasing the city's footprint. Now, on the sidewalk, you can cut me a break where you've got an unusual condition. I know that the ordinary case with new subdivisions is that you want curb gutter and a grow strip and a divided sidewalk. This is not the ordinary case. And in this case, I think requiring that sidewalk would be problematic with ACHD and wasteful. If you look right now, this is at the lot looking west. This is at the lot looking east. This is a fully developed up area. It's not going to be further developed. If you look at the surrounding map, all these lots that you can see on that lot, on that map, have no sidewalk. So it would be an outlier to put sidewalk in there. Personally, I don't necessarily disagree with the curb. I would like that, but apparently ACHD doesn't want that right now, or so they want to control the water. I'm going to have to deal with that. My understanding is that from the engineer in this case, that how you deal with this is if we don't have the curb running the drainage, is that we basically have to allow for the natural flow to continue over the property, and we're going to have to work with that with grading. The sidewalk would be as much of a problem as a curb and gutter, because again, it would be directing that runoff down Starview, which now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out a way to basically allow it to flow over the property. So one of the reasons why I came into planning and zoning and said, look, can we waive the sidewalk requirement? In that case, it wasn't the curb, but just the sidewalk, was because it was a sidewalk from nowhere to nowhere in an already developed up place. And I know that there's the concept of, look, every time things are getting developed, let's go ahead and put in some sidewalk, but this is a residential neighborhood that's fixed. It's going to be the same in 100 years. But planning and zoning says, no, Mr. Johnson, we don't like that. Second concern, and I think that this is, if I had to have a sidewalk, the only other sidewalks up there are attached. This is further up on the Boulder Heights, and you'll notice that, or the Boulder Point, they have the sidewalks attached to the curb. My understanding is that the reason for that is to minimize the hard surface area in the foothills. So if I had to have a sidewalk, I'd at least like it attached to the curb. That was an alternative, except for today, we just learned that ACHD has said, no, A, we're not requiring any improvements because the traffic's so light, and B, we don't want any curb or any improvements at all because we don't want to direct the water. Because the drainage that's being proposed further down Starview, the storm drainage, it's not completed yet. They apparently say, look, we're forcing more water down Starview on us until we have this completed. It's going to be a problem. Okay. A third issue is courtesy to the neighbors, honestly. As you can imagine, the neighbors up here are not really excited about anything being built on this lot. They've had a lot of open space there and they've seen it. And this is a view looking from my neighbors across the street, looking out over their viewscape, is that they've got some vistas there. One of the byproducts of doing the proposed site condition number 2 is that I would plant class 3 or class 2 trees every 40 feet right up along the road, which really those trees are between 30 feet wide and high to 70 feet wide and high. That's what falls in that. And I'd be effectively putting up a landscape screen and blocking any remaining view of those neighbors. And they're upset already. I'd really rather not. There's certainly, I'm sure there's going to be landscaping there, but it's not necessarily going to be forced along that street. Under the circumstances, we have really 3 reasons to cut me a break on the sidewalk. One, and this one I think is serious, and this is one that's new, is that ACHD doesn't want to be directing any more water down Starvey for the time being. Second, of course, my neighbors, if I can avoid putting those trees up, that's great. Third, it's a sidewalk from nowhere to nowhere, which I know there's a policy of putting in sidewalk, but I think this might be an occasion to avoid it. And it's gonna, it's going to make it problematic for us to deal with that drainage without the curb. As an alternative, I personally am interested in being able to tie into drainage with ACHD whenever they're fit. I think that that's better long-term. If we could pose an alternative condition rather than the curb, gutter, and sidewalk, just a condition that I work with ACHD on developing whatever curb or improvement or drainage improvement they want along Starview when they're ready to put it in place. If we can do something like that, and work on their timeline, I'd appreciate that. I really appreciate everybody's time and energy. I know this isn't as consequential as some of the things that we've been dealing with today, but it's important to me, and I appreciate you taking your time. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I have one question. Go for it. It's really difficult. The photos are helpful. It's difficult to tell from the flat photos in our packet, but the lots look like they're on a slope or partly on a slope. And my question is, how or to what extent does the presence of a sidewalk there affect how you can build on or use the lot?
Here, let's look at some photos that are probably, yeah, this shows, again, I'm looking east here. So the presence of a sidewalk there's probably some space there. It is going to take some regrading. I imagine by the time I got the toe and everything in there would be some grading. It's not going to be inexpensive. And this is 240 feet frontage. I mean, that's why these lots are going to be so great. They're going to be 2 120-foot lots that people should be happy with. I'll be happy with. It'll push that back and it'll cause some problems. I think the biggest problem in the immediate problem, and a real one that I didn't contemplate before, is that if I put in a sidewalk, even if I don't put in the curb and gutter, that's still going to be forcing drainage down Starview, which is the concern that ACHD was raising. And yeah, where was that?
Madam Mayor,
Is it just looking up the other way?
one follow-up, and maybe you don't know, but how tall are the structures you're planning to build there?
Well, I'm only planning on keeping one of the lots. I imagine that we'll probably be 2 stories over grade. But you build with a daylight basement typically out there. So it's going to depend on that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Just thank you very much.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I think that the trees you're referring to are the ones that would be required for the separated sidewalk that we're going on the treescape, but you're not in opposition to the revegetation plan. That's also one of the conditions.
No, I haven't. No, that the thing with the trees that I had the issue is what that would be building is it would be building a screen along the roadway, and I get the picture. In most of our other neighborhoods, that's actually a nice amenity. It goes up and it grows up. It's over the street. It makes the streetways nice, and it has a different aesthetic in this case because the real concern is that whatever viewscape those neighbors have across the street, and granted, there's going to be something in their way, but those 6 trees of that size or whatever it is are going to be.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I'm on board with you here.
Okay.
I think that this is in the WUI area. We've got some restrictions and some revegetation that's listed in here that has to be approved by our revegetation specialist. The trees, I think, were specific to the sidewalk.
Yes.
And so I don't know that the trees would actually be required, without the sidewalk. The last question I've got for you regarding the sidewalk is that I think I agree. I don't know that it makes sense to put this on here, especially doing it without the curb and gutter and a variety of other things, and it's not recommended by ACHD. Now, I do, never want to give up hope that there may be a sidewalk somewhere. Is there the ability to make sure that there is room for a sidewalk in the future if they ever decided there was going to be put one, even if you didn't have to put it in yourself?
There probably is if we did that. Wait, where did I go? It's what I would ask is it something at least be more consistent with what's utilized in the rest of the neighborhood where it is, that it's just an attached sidewalk, especially because this is the slope starts at the street and goes down. The wider I make that sidewalk, the further out that I'm going to have to grade and sets up.
So you wouldn't be opposed to us protecting for there to be an ability for a future on-street sidewalk?
I could live with that. I'm trying to think of how that would be there, but I could live with that as some sort of a I suppose it'd be some sort of a covenant or something like that. That maybe when the curb went in, that it'd include an attached sidewalk or something.
Cool. Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Any questions of staff?
Madam Mayor, I'll go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Madam Mayor, the question was going to be if we didn't require the sidewalk, which ACHC at this point is recommending that we don't put in, could we include in a condition, I guess it would be an easement in case there was a future sidewalk, that easement would be protected?
Madam Mayor, council members, we could do a sidewalk easement or like a public access easement for a future sidewalk, but as part of the subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I just want to confirm nobody is here for this one. Online. Any further questions of staff? I don't think there was anything to rebut. All right. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, can we do these as one motion or is it 2 motions?
Rather than rezone.
One. All right, I move that we approve CAR 22-46 to rezone of approximately 1 acre from A1 to R1C at 3121 East Starview Drive.
Second.
We have a motion, and a second. I think it probably makes sense to have comments on the sub rather than now. So I'll just ask the clerk to call the roll.
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Nash, Willetts,
Yep.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
And Madam Mayor, I move that we approve Dane subdivision, Boise City preliminary final plat, SUB 22-70 with the following modifications to the conditions. That we remove the requirement of curb, gutter, sidewalk consistent with ACHD recommendations and add a condition to coordinate with ACHD on a drainage plan.
Second.
Madam Mayor, did that include also protecting an easement for a future sidewalk?
It did not, and I can explain my reasoning
Okay.
after.
We have a motion, and a second, so go ahead.
Yeah. I think that it makes a lot of sense, Madam Mayor, to remove the curb gutter sidewalk, coordinate on a drainage plan. But on projects like this, when ACHD does end up installing sidewalks in the future, generally it's already inside the ACHD right of way. So I'm not concerned about requiring additional easement in a setback that already exists to create a sidewalk that's outside of ACHD's current right of way in the future.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I guess I would have to ask staff if that would limit our ability to put in a sidewalk in the future, if it would give us enough room. There's a chance that this could be a sidewalk. It's also a chance it could be, a future easement to a pathway further up in the foothills. I think that the point I was trying to make was just to not eliminate that from being a possibility. And so I would worry about taking away any sort of space or opportunity for that for the future. While I don't know that it would ever actually be used. And so I don't know if it's appropriate to ask staff if we would need that easement in order for there to be one, or if there is enough right away that we wouldn't need it.
Yeah, that's a question you can ask.
Madam Mayor, council members, I did just check and it looks to be that there is about 9 or 10 feet between the property line and the current roadway. So there would be enough room for an attached sidewalk in the right of way as that currently stands. But if there was, a want or a thought process about an additional easement, while there is a building setback of 20 feet from the front property line, just protecting that public area after that, area between the road and the property line. I'm sorry, my brain's not working very well. That could be added.
So, Madam Mayor, just some clarification there. It sounds like it's not needed unless we were concerned that when the building was put in, that would create too crowded of an environment as far as the setback goes from where people would be on a sidewalk.
Madam Mayor, council members, any building that would go on to this parcel would have to meet any of the building setbacks, which are typically 20 feet to parking, 15 feet to building. And that is something that is around the city. We do see that ACHD sometimes does take right of way out of that, even so, and that does make for a fairly crowded front area. But again, that is the minimum that would be required.
Okay. Yeah, I think with that much of the right of way, I don't know that I'm concerned that we wouldn't be able to get it in there.
Further discussion? All right, clerk, we call the roll?
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.